Hey Diane, how are you?
Good.
By the way, I thought it'd be nice to take turns leading the Pledge of Allegiance. So as Vice Chair, Jean, maybe you'll lead that. And you can use the flag over my shoulder.
All right, let's do the Pledge of Allegiance, everyone.
All right, well, let me open the meeting.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Are we live?
Yep, you're all set.
Right. Okay. Good evening. Welcome to the July 7th meeting of the Town of Cohasset Select Board. Tonight's meeting will be conducted on the Zoom platform, and it's live streamed on Cohasset 143 TV and Cohasset's Facebook page. The public is invited to participate on the Zoom platform, which can be accessed using the link provided at the top of the posted agenda for tonight's meeting. That would be on the town website. Members of the board and other scheduled participants will be able to participate when called on by the chair. It means we want to raise our hands. There's a little button on your Zoom platform that says raise hand. Board members will be able to ask questions of any participant. All votes taken in this meeting will be by roll call. Members of the public who wish to ask questions are asked to raise their virtual hands on Zoom, and at the discretion of the chair will be promoted into the meeting. Members must provide their full name and address for the public record. Please note that comments on platforms other than Zoom will not be monitored. This meeting is being recorded and will be available for later viewing on Cohasset 143. We customarily start with a Pledge of Allegiance, and I'd like to rotate that among various members. So Vice Chair Jean, will you lead us?
Sure. All right. I pledge allegiance to my flag and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, tonight's meeting, we have the agenda here. We normally start our meetings with a public forum. However, because this meeting is more of a continuation of a meeting 10 days ago about various issues facing the town, of decisions that we have to make, we're going to have the discussion be available for members as we go through each agenda item. So if you wish to discuss on that agenda item, just raise your hand. This is a working meeting. We're trying to get a lot of information out, and we also want the select board to be able to do, excuse me, to discuss matters. And so people at home can see how we deliberate and make sure everything, is open. So if you have comments, we will ask that you make that comment on this particular agenda item, and that you keep it on topic and no more than 2 minutes. And we really want to keep it just one comment per person on that. Any general comments, we have another meeting come up and you're welcome to do that. But for tonight's meeting, which is better understand as a working meeting of the select board to involve the community as we discuss a number of issues and initiatives that the town may or may not. We will have the ability to take votes. The intention of taking the votes is really if there's minor housekeeping things, and if you don't say you're going to have a vote, you can't go forward. So that being said, let's move to the next first thing on the agenda.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
Did we do a roll call?
No, we didn't. And
We need to do a roll call.
Thank you, Diane. We see your years of experience. All right, roll call. Jack Creighton here.
Jean Haley-Dibble here.
Diane Kennedy here.
Paul Grady present.
Okay. Okay. So the first matter is a ballot deadline. There's a state mandated deadline to get items on the ballot, and some things do require that. The deadline is August 4th. So in order to do this, we would have to come to some kind of conclusion. We would have to schedule the required public hearings for advisory, capital budget. Quite honestly, it's very difficult to do that. It might be possible. I don't think it's likely. But anyway, open it up to discussion from the select board. Jean.
Yeah, I would just add in, this is a part of the reason that we're having this working group is to really do our homework to have the necessary information that we need to even have conclusions before we can bring something to capital or advisory. And we've done a lot of work since the last select board meeting, but given how tight deadlines are, it's just necessary to frankly, keep doing that work. And the other sort of issue that's out there is, as of July 15th, virtual meetings are not necessarily allowed anymore. And so we need to take advantage of the opportunity to have virtual meetings and accelerate this work unless the governor signs a legislation enabling the continuation of virtual meetings. So we're really up against some hard deadlines if, which is a big if, we decide to move forward with any ballot questions for the August 4th deadline.
Okay, Paul and Diane.
Yeah, I to be honest, I haven't participated in any discussion since our last meeting. So, and I just got my packet about an hour ago or a half hour ago when I actually got home. So I feel really unprepared to substantively discuss all the agenda items. Leading to that is I really don't see how we could possibly, in a matter of 3 weeks and with a diminished finance staff in town hall, get to a point where we would be doing the voters any service by presenting a debt exclusion, particularly before town meeting. I think that certainly there's a couple of projects that have been fully vetted, have been fully or relatively costed out. And I think we need to keep those discussions moving, but I would be more inclined to let this deadline pass specifically for the November ballot, really focus on getting all of the information, all of the details, prioritizing from within this kind of menu of very significant infrastructure projects. And if we have to do a special election to get funding to teed up so that we can actually start these projects, then that's what we'll do. I mean, it's a little more work, but I think we owe it to town meeting in particular to have the substantive discussions on these substantive items before then. And certainly some of the roads and sidewalk discussion, which we'll talk about, are in our operating budget. So that is a different conversation. But with respect to a debt exclusion, I think it would be disingenuous to the voters, and not having a full board here tonight, I think hampers some of our discussion in terms of moving forward big projects.
Point well taken, Diane. Jane or Paul?
I'll let Paul go.
I just
Well-
have a question because being relatively new to the board, I'm looking at this agenda and so I'm just going to pose this as a question. I realize that we've stepped up the meeting so we can get things move forward, moving faster. I'm just wondering, for my own edification, how long is everything here been in front of the select board that we have to step it up so fast? And I'm in agreement with getting something done because I want to get something done, but I don't, I'm just wondering, it's been there for a long time. So,
I mean, I can try to start that and Jack jump in. I mean, obviously town hall's been, teed up and has had a number of town meeting votes already. We did the field and court study, but we haven't had any proposal put forth yet. And hopefully we can step that up. But again, to be able to have enough information to make decisions and go through relevant committees by August 4th, I thought it was August 3rd, I just don't think it's possible. Roads and sidewalks, again, some of that is in the circuit. And I think when we have a presentation later on that, some of that's part of the operational project. So I don't know which of these are new or not. Obviously, Elm Street's been around for about a year and a half.
So
But they're recommend, yeah.
That's why I appreciate stepping up the meetings, is because it seems to me that everything I'm looking at has been on the back burner, or the burner, I'm sorry, for a long period of time. So I can appreciate stepping up the meeting so the voters that did put us in office can see that we're getting something done for them. That's all.
I don't disagree with that, Paul. My concern is putting a debt exclusion in front. Like, I believe me, I'd be ready to vote for town hall, 6 months ago, but I think that to put a debt exclusion is kind of I just don't see that happening. I really don't, for projects that we haven't yet discussed in any detail.
Thanks, Diane. Jane, you, and Diane, after that, I'd like, you mentioned the town hall. If you had one or two other that you thought, and then we can move on to actually going through the meat of this meeting. But Jane, you had a comment?
Yeah, and I don't disagree with Diane or Paul for that matter. The thing that I would say that I think is missing from this entire discussion that needs to be added in and won't be done by August 4th is a long-term capital and financial plan, because when we are talking about a debt exclusion, we have a 10-year capital plan that was added in as background into the packet for people's edification. A lot of this is background information that's probably going to be in Tuesday's packet as well. It's publicly available online and was linked on the agenda. But I think that this is a key missing piece, but it's also part of our infrastructure goal. And so I know that there was select board interest, including with select member Evans, in trying to drive towards a possible debt exclusion in the fall, if that made sense. And the reality is, if we want to do any real consideration of that possibility, we have to be doing it now. And it sounds like the board is actually sort of coalescing around the reality that it's just not enough time to do everything we need to do. That said, I did want to point out that the capital plan, and involving the schools too, which I think are a key piece of the puzzle as well, and getting their input into that planning process are really important, particularly when we're talking about a debt exclusion, which is going to require people to prioritize and see the full financial picture, right, of what we're asking them to pay for. If we're asking them to pay for really big projects or buildings with other big things looming in the background that we know are on the horizon, I do think that that's important that people understand that whole thing. But at the same time, to Paul's point, it's important that we continue pressing, because as I'm sure we'll hear from the town hall folks, and as you're about to hear on Fields and Courts, the delay is money. It is increasing the cost dramatically. And so even with this comprehensive planning, I think we really just have to hustle on it and come to some decisions, because the longer we wait, the more expensive it becomes to really accomplish anything. So that's all I would say on that point.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Just
Diane, you mentioned that you might have a couple aside from the.
No, I mean, certainly the projects that have been really well discussed and engineered already and are basically what's called, shovel ready, is obviously Town Hall and Elm Street. So, it's some of the newer ones that I think we're talking about in terms of trying to accelerate the discussion. But again, I still think getting it to a point where we would put a debt exclusion before town meeting is, again, with all of the limitations. And I think our goals, our second goal was to come up with this, long-term capital plan. So that needs to be a focus. That is also going to be a little challenged given staff constraints, but again, I still think it's a priority. And then we said we would go for these infrastructure projects for fall funding. So that first step can be town meeting. That to me, and the order of operations of going to a debt exclusion vote first and then town meeting second, I wasn't comfortable with it. I get that it's allowed, but I think the timeline is still the same. We should get these projects prioritized and decide what we want to do with it, in parallel with the capital planning, and have our presentation at town meeting to solidify, and then do whatever debt exclusion might be needed at the time.
Okay, thanks. Does anybody else have things that they think are well down the road? Like Diane says, she believes Elm Street and the town hall. Does anybody else have things that they think are pretty close to moving forward? I see your hand raised, Paul. I just wanted to get that out. Okay, Paul.
No, I was going to say I can appreciate what Diane said about Elm Street and Town Hall. I know there's been a lot of activity on that, and I applaud all the hard work. I just want to see those taken in context with all the other needs and priorities of Cohasset. All for both, but I still want to see it taken to go back to what Jean was saying. So the town people see, our residents see an exact figure as to what we're looking at. But, instead of taking small bites out of the apple, packaging it as a whole is what I'm getting at.
Very, very good. Jean, were you raising your hand or?
Yeah, I think this again goes to the long-term financial planning. I think that there's a lot of stuff out there that's going to intersect with some of this, including stuff that's on the 10-year plan that we need to take into account. And I think to your question about whether anything is really ready, I'm not sure I agree that Elm Street's ready, and we can go and have that discussion in terms of the actual cost. But I would put probably Fields and Courts in a similar place as Elm Street. We've got cost estimates. We're not sure how comfortable we are with them. And there's a few varieties of different permutations that can take. And so I think Field and Courts could be in a similar place in terms of the projects that are before us on this agenda.
Okay, and by the way, we are going to be discussing Elm Street and Fields and Courts later on. So if we have comments on that, we can do that. Everybody's set with this agenda item? Are we ready to move on to the next?
Next is Fields and Courts. That's good.
Yeah, Diane, yeah, mine like a steel trap. I'm impressed. So, okay, Fields and Courts. Chris, do you have, can you give us the update on, or Tracy, on where we are on this?
Actually, if I can grab Michelle to come up, I think,
Oh, okay, Michelle.
just give me just a second.
People at home should know that all this information is on the town website. You may have to search for it. We are attempting, it didn't come to fruition for tonight's meeting until just before the meeting, but we are having, so when you want this information, you'll be able to go to the town website and click on it and get to read all the background studies, and there are many of them. But anyway, Michelle?
Sure. So we have an update on the field study. We had the comprehensive field study done. It was completed. We've had a couple of public forums now with all the stakeholders. What we decided to do as a group is to look at it in phases, because before us in the field study, we have millions of dollars worth of projects, right? Some are a wish list, some are true needs, and some are wants. So what we did is we looked at the entire field study as a whole, and we pulled out things that we thought were important to the community, highlighting the need to improve tennis courts and pickleball and those recreational activities in town, which is part of the overall $10.5 million funding request for Milliken. However, breaking it into phases, which would be phase 1, 2, and possibly 3, we can start with the tennis courts and pickleball and improving the site there for those specific activities, as well as adding some additional parking. To do that, the estimate comes in at about $2.8 million. So we consider that a phase one of that project. And really something that the community has been talking about for some time now is improving the tennis courts, both for the high school and for the community.
Michelle, could I ask,
I'm sorry?
Michelle, I'd just like to add a brief question. We've always had tennis courts there. I'm not sure about pickleball. Was there any attempt to see what it'll cost to do the tennis courts as opposed to adding the pickleball?
Sure. So if you break out the total costs that they gave us, the tennis courts alone come in at about $550,000 just for the tennis court resurfacing. However, there will be some additional work needed for the retaining wall, mobilization, and additional site improvements. And that isn't completely broken out, but you'd have to add on top of that $550,000 contingency in items such as that. So what we did ask them to break out was just tennis courts and adding pickleball courts because we're hearing such a need for them in town.
And just to be clear, in those field study forums, there wasn't like we'll break out tennis courts and do that first. There's other work that we associated with the tennis courts at Deer Hill and now Osgood as a part of that 10.5 million, because I don't think there will be public support at a ballot just for tennis courts.
Diane?
Yeah, just a couple questions. About maybe 5 years ago, the select board kind of tasked a working group to look at tennis courts, and I was on that working group. I just want to make sure that, because when on the agenda, I got the Activita study. So I just wondered where the estimates are coming from, and whether the working groups, including the schools and the rec commission, only because ultimately with the tennis courts, those are the two managers of that site. And I just want to make sure. The other thing is with respect to that, and again, I would do the tennis courts like yesterday too. But if there was ever, I've heard rumors, this is just rumors, but that, the school facilities committee was looking at the whole Milliken property as a potential site if they were going to build a separate building. And, I want to make sure that, again, as we plan, this is why longer term capital planning has to be taken into context with everything else, that, we're actually honing in on the properties that we need to. So just a couple questions. Who's been working on getting these estimates together? Do we have an engineering firm that's been retained, and kind of what's the status of that to get us actually a proposed project as opposed to the recommendations that were more conceptual in the Activita plan that was in our packet?
Sure. So these estimates did come from Activitas. It's part of the field study that they do give us some cost estimates. We have not retained an engineer or a firm at this point in time to prepare bid documents. We wouldn't do that until we got the go-ahead from the select board to do so. As far as Milliken Field maybe being a potential site for the schools, I'm under the impression, and I'd have to fact check this, but that it is deed restricted for recreational purposes only. So I believe that's why this has been chosen. And as far as the working group, we have invited all of the stakeholders to attend these public forums. So we feel as though we've had great input from them. If we do move forward with adding these additional courts, of course, we would, get a bigger group together to see, to work with the engineering firm, similar to what the town hall building committee is doing, to get us over the finish line.
Thank you.
Any other questions on the tennis? Michelle, just to go back to, it's unclear to me that you can't have the tennis courts. Is there a difference between just doing the tennis courts and what's the additional cost for pickleball courts, which I assume are new courts?
Yep, so it would be the addition of 4 pickleball courts in that same location. In the cost just for the pickleball courts, again, without contingencies, site work, retaining walls and all of that, is about $200,000.
Okay. Paul?
But Paul, you're muted.
Thanks so much. I was just listening to Michelle and Jean. I feel it's kind of inherent on us to listen to what the town's asking for. If this pickleball is taken off, so if this moves forward, I'd rather see us go with the package because it has taken off. It's a popular thing. It's good for the town. It's good for the kids. It's good for anybody who wants to play it. So I wouldn't suggest parsing it out.
And yeah, just, I totally agree. In fact, I get calls from the tennis folks in town about, putting pickleball lines on a tennis court. And that's like, don't do that. So this project, tennis pickleballs, is a total of $2.8 million, with 550 being a tennis court, 200 being the new pickleball courts, and then all the other site work and prep, and that's the estimate.
Yes.
And the kind of magnitude that we're talking about for this.
So this is the type of information that's so helpful for the select board to have. It's also very helpful for the taxpaying citizens at home to see actually how we, make the sausage, so to speak. Paul?
I just have a question for Michelle. So Michelle, what would you need from this board to move forward? I think this is a heck of a project.
Yeah, so I think if you adopt the idea of moving this forward, and potentially the other field study items that I'm going to present this evening, I think it behooves us to create a recreational group to, help us facilitate all of the tasks that are going to need to be moving forward, working with the engineering firm, very similar to what the Town Hall Building Committee has done.
But you have a group in place right now, don't you?
We have stakeholders from all youth organizations and people within the community at large that are participating. I don't know if you would want to create a committee just for this. I'm really not sure if that would be your choice or.
I think they might jump aboard.
I'm sorry.
I might apologize.
Okay, no, that's fine. Jean?
I think we're gonna see the end price of all this is 10.5 million for the 2 fields and pickleball. And I think this goes into the need to do long-range financial planning, including involving the schools in this discussion, because it's the schools that are going to, it's their fields at Deer Hill and Osgood that we're looking at. And just to be clear, the field study, the field and court study, really did identify huge field needs. We're down like 15 athletic fields, given the demand from soccer, lacrosse, baseball, softball,
Field hockey, yeah.
field hockey. And so, and I know, Michelle, you're about to turn to that, but I did want to make sure that as we're talking about next steps, we're keeping in mind that we're talking about the whole entire big project as we move forward. And we probably want to get the input from capital budget and the schools on both of those before. I think there are necessary stakeholders we need to have in the conversation because of the price. And because the schools have jurisdiction over the school grounds, and we want to, make sure that we have them weigh in as well.
Could I ask the board a question? This might help move things along. What I'm hearing is everybody says that we don't break tennis and pickleball, that we want both. Is that correct?
My answer to that would be yes.
Okay.
But,
Right.
I think we need to pursue all of these ideas and do the work that needs to get done to bring them to a point where we can actually have a vote of this is what we want to do and this is what we want to put in front of the town meeting for funding. and again, let me just do a little governance nerdiness, which is when we were doing the working groups, setting the working groups up for the master plan priorities, one of the ideas, obviously it's way more efficient to have a couple of key stakeholders working with staff and having these committees be staffed. The challenge with that is those aren't necessarily public meetings. And, it's especially for the select board, we need to be as an advisory as well, kind of in the loop on meetings and discussions and where things are at so that we don't, show up at a meeting and things are so far down the path and we've never had an opportunity to kind of weigh in. So I think initially it maybe can stay in-house, but at some point when we're getting to a point of presenting something to town meeting, we really should raise a committee.
No, I agree. Somebody else have their hand up?
Yeah, Jack.
Brian Host, by the way,
Yeah,
is
I'm gonna-
waiting.
Would you like me to promote Brian?
Yes, in just a second. The thing is, when I asked about tennis versus pickle, is as I've heard some people say you don't want to do both or whatever, but what I'm hearing from the board is it's very clear that you want to keep both of them in there. And I think this is important because it lets the people who are going to go forward know that there is at least some guidance on that very limited, very limited thing of whether we drop tennis or pickleball. So I'm hearing from everybody that's both. Anyway, Diane, I saw your hand.
I
And then
think
we got-
Paul had his hand up first.
Okay,
Jack, just to answer your question, I'm a hard yes on that.
okay.
So just, if you just put it down, I believe that pickleball is extremely popular. Tennis obviously is tennis. I think it'd be a heck of an improvement.
Okay, Diane?
Yeah,
Thanks.
and I'm a hard yes as well, because
Okay.
when we take up any space in town for fields, it's really serving a very limited population. It's the kids that are playing soccer or lacrosse or baseball or whatever it is. But tennis is one of the sports and one of the public recreation facilities that we have in town that actually can serve everybody. And pickleball in particular is something that, there's no pickleball team. So that's going to be fully overseen or managed by the rec commission or the rec department, and is something that, me and one friend can go and do.
Okay, so I think we have a consensus on there. We have Brian and Bill McGowan are waiting. Brian, just identify yourself and your address.
Brian Host, 29 Heather Drive, and chair of the Capital Budget Committee. Just really one comment with regards to the question of, tennis and pickleball or just tennis alone. I think from a capital budget perspective, we're going to want to see the numbers both ways. If we're going to add pickleball, that's fine, but I think we should know what the incremental cost of adding pickleball to the project will be. I'm particularly drawn to the, just to the breakdown of costs here. The tennis courts themselves are, 500 at the low end, just 550, which is, a little bit lower than I think what's been in our historical, 10-year capital plan. So there was some budget for site work and retaining walls and whatnot. But really what we're talking about is a leap from $500,000 to resurface the courts to a $2.8 million project. And I just think we need to know what decisions we're making that are triggering that incremental cost. If all this site work is required to do just the tennis courts and the pickleball really is just, another 200 on the margin, that's probably going to draw one reaction. If all this site work and retaining work is really being driven by the addition of pickleball courts, I think there may be a different reaction. So we should understand the numbers and what's driving the cost. That's
Okay.
my only point.
Thank you very much, Brian. Bill McGowan? Bill, can you hear us? Oh, there he is. I see him. Come on. You have to unmute yourself, Bill.
Video or mute, and it's probably you don't want to see me, which I understand, which is probably perfectly good. But I will tell you two things. One, I got 4 calls from folks saying that this is not on the cable television station, even though it was posted to be on, and one of them was hot. I don't know. I looked, I didn't see it. So just for you to know. And I don't know whether we're supposed to have full access to who's like our participants or video or not. I don't know how this was set up.
Well, on Zoom, you should be, it should be at number 1 on 143. I don't have the faintest idea, but certainly I suspect that either Tracy or Chris is already in the background trying to figure it out. But on Zoom, we would have a regular Zoom thing. You would click on the video in the top bar. So we should be able to see you.
I just heard from 2 people, including somebody in the next room, that it is on Comcast anyway, so it could be a Verizon issue.
Yeah, it could be. All right, that's all I want to say. Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you, Bill. All right, so further comments on fields. What I'm hearing is we want some more information, but it's really something we want to continue pursuing. Okay, let's move on to town hall.
So
Actually, we need to wait for 7 minutes for town hall. Go ahead.
I was just going to present the remainder of the field study.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. So as Jean had stated, that during the field study process, they identified how inadequate our field space is for the amount of activities that we play. So what they've also identified is improving the Deer Hill space, which has currently been improved in the past by softball. So girls softball currently plays there, but what they are able to do is fit a field there that will also benefit the lacrosse team, soccer team, field hockey. And they gave us an estimate for that, and that's coming in at $3.5 million. It satisfies the need for the additional fields in town because they're suggesting it be synthetic turf. And for every synthetic turf field you have, it equates to, I believe the calculation is 2 or 3 grass fields because you can play on it more often. And we were also asked to see if we could fit yet another multi-purpose field somewhere within the school grounds. And they identified the ability to put in another multi-purpose field in front of the Osgood School. That would also be synthetic turf. Doesn't need to be, can be a grass field, but anytime you put synthetic turf on, once again, it's more playable for a longer period of time. They would add lighting to that field, so it could be used more often, more frequently. There is a lot of site work involved in that particular field, and the price tag is estimated to be about $4.5 million. So as Jean stated, the ask for all of these things is upwards of $10 million. But that's where we saw the most need in the short term.
Diane?
Just a question on the need, not questioning the need. I know there's a need. Is it primarily for the youth programs, or is any of this going to help with any needs that the high school or middle school, any kind of organized sports through the school system?
Sure. So I think it's twofold, Diane. I think it will help with youth organizations for sure. It'll also help with high school because currently all the play is done on alumni field. And if in fact they do decide to move forward with a new school, they're going to need additional space because for staging purposes. So they may potentially lose alumni field for a period of time, and having these regulation size fields will actually help.
And just a question in terms of kind of the management of the fields that are on the school property. Is that, if you're the, Cohasset Field Hockey Club, do you reserve your fields through rec or through the schools, or how does that typically work?
So currently, right now, any fields on school property are reserved through the schools. Any fields managed by the town are reserved through recreation. I mean, ultimately, what you'd like to see is one big scheduling platform. So everyone can see cross-functionally what fields are available. And that would be a huge benefit to having all of these fields available to both youth organizations and high school.
That's very good. Jean, I saw your hand.
Yeah, so Diane, to your question, I know, for example, that our high school softball field is playing at the Barnes complex because there's just not enough room at other places. And I'm not as sure if middle and high school are playing at other areas. They may be playing, for example, at Milliken. I think high school baseball might be playing at Milliken, but there's definitely some patchwork going on of the different, varsity, JV, et cetera, sports happening. So that's one point. The other point that I just wanted to flag, which I don't think is fully reflected in the Osgood study, is that if we are proposing, and again, we should really, I think, consult with the school committee in another meeting akin to this. If we are proposing more, like 2 bigger fields or 2 more functional fields at Deer Hill and Osgood, that's going to raise parking issues. And where people can park, parking is already pretty constrained. And so this may be actually a good opportunity, but will lead to expense in terms of how we add in parking surrounding, for example, the Osgood field and how to navigate that. So I did want to, in the interest of just full disclosure, say that this doesn't account for parking needs, and we're probably going to have to price that in and, figure out how to do that. So, that's still out there.
Yeah, I would note that one of the issues that we are seeing is if the town is funding all these fields, we probably will have a vested interest in who allocates the fields. But anyway, other comments? Okay, Michelle, anything else on fields?
No, not for
You've
today.
done a very good job. We greatly appreciate it.
Thank you.
It's so important to have accurate information, well presented. So we're moving on to town hall. Chris, who do we want to have? Do we have anybody from town hall who wishes to present?
Do it. In fact, Michelle's already here, so there's one.
I know.
So we
And we
have
have Carolyn, I
Carolyn.
believe, coming up, right?
Carolyn Coffey, Mark
Okay.
Cameron, John Lemieux.
Okay, are we, are we running into quorum issues with all of them?
So Jack, I did post a joint meeting in the event
Okay.
that several decided to come.
Good, very good. So Carolyn, why don't you bring your people to order and have everybody identify themselves, and let's get to work.
All right. Phil Lair is on ASP this week, so he is not with us. So in his absence, I will open the town hall meeting. I don't think we're going to have a quorum, but just in case, and we'll do a roll call of the people who are here, and we will reintroduce John Lemieux and Steve Kirby from Vertex, which is the owner's project manager that we have hired to advise us on this project. So right now we just have Carolyn Coffey here and Mark.
Cameron here.
And that's it for now.
Okay. So who was going to give us the information? Was it John or?
Mark and I both are.
Okay, well, you control it. You're in charge. Go for it.
All
Could
right.
I could I get ability to share my screen?
Yes. Jean, can you get that done?
Yes, I'm going to try to.
I would do that, but my BlackBerry doesn't work anymore.
You should have it now, Mark. Let me know if not.
All right. Okay. Is that working?
Yep.
All right. All right, I guess I'll kick it off. So this town hall building committee was assembled and tasked starting in 2019 to evaluate the town hall and how best to move forward. But with the charge that it was to remain at 41 Highland Ave and the existing 1800 structure was to remain. So how did we get here? We evaluated the conditions of the building. We have an aging building. The 1800s building was last renovated in what we heard was 1928. And we have the addition that was added on in the 80s, which is roughly 40 years old at this point. And a lot of the systems are reaching the end of their usable life and requiring significant maintenance, replacement, and upgrades. We also studied the square footage. We compared that to the square footage need. We identified the square footage needs through a space planning study, and we compared that to the existing square footage that we have. We found that we have inadequate amount of square footage, and we also have structural constraints that limit our ability to renovate both structures, 1800s and 1980s, in a manner that most efficiently uses the square footage. The 1800s has trusses, and those trusses cannot be moved. So the layout on the second floor is confined to what it is. In the 1980s building, there's stairs, load-bearing walls that really limit the layout and a full gut and renovation of of our options there. So we studied the costs associated with the renovation and a renovation/rebuild, and it was the full committee's recommendation to proceed with a renovation and rebuild combination. After that, we proceeded into schematic design. We then progressed to design development. And after design development, we went through several value engineering options to see how we could reduce the cost and what could be done to most effectively use the town's money. So now we have currently we have a building that is 80% designed. We received funding at annual Springtown meeting of 2022 to hire a construction management firm. That firm will then provide us with another cost estimate. Our last cost estimate was done in November of 21, and we are continuing advancing the design. What's next? The Town Hall Building Committee is to select through a process which John Lemieux from Vertex could go through the state process of us as a town selecting a construction manager and the solicitation of bids and the process that we have to follow in order to hire a construction manager. Then the Town Hall Building Committee would proceed with finalizing the design, and ultimately we'd be asking the select board and the town to provide the project with full funding.
And now the multi-millions dollar question, right? How much is it going to cost? This slide shows in the middle that the total project cost is now estimated to be between 19 and 20 million, depending on when we get started, less the appropriations that have already been allocated at town meetings and a possible CPC grant. We're looking at a funding need of between 13 and 14 million dollars. So where did these numbers come from? The last estimate that we got from AM Fogarty was prepared in November of 2021. Since that time, Vertex has seen projects that they are working in coming in with real-time bids of per square foot cost significantly higher than what the AM Fogarty bid turned out to be. In order to make sure that we are presenting a realistic or at least a conservative amount of money that this project may take, we looked at this more on a per square foot basis. Ultimately, the construction manager that we are hiring is going to dig in and do the same work that AM Fogarty did and talk to subcontractors and give us a better number and help us with value engineering and figuring out ways that we might be able to do things less expensively, but this is the best information we have right now. You will notice too that there's a contingency line in here that is roughly 12% of the cost of the project, ranges from 1.7 to 1.9 million. So we do have that built in for both construction and designed contingencies. So with this, we were talking, you all were talking in the beginning about the timing of the discussion about a debt exclusion. And while all points raised are excellent, Jean hit the nail on the head too with the delay is money. And we know that the longer that we wait, the more it's going to cost. While the rate of increase may flatten, we know it's not going to get any less expensive the longer we wait. From a timing perspective, what worked nicely about the fall, or if we get to early winter, is if we do get it approved, it gives us the ability to procure materials that have extended lead times so that we can make sure that we have everything on the property when it is needed. It also gives us the time to empty the building, find temporary housing for the employees, and be ready so that as soon as first thaw hits and we can begin construction and hopefully get the building closed in prior to the winter, because that will save us money in the long run. So there is information on the cost and some timing discussion. If there are any questions, Mark and I and John and Steve from Vertex are here to hopefully answer some of them. Jean?
Thanks, Carolyn. I appreciate the presentation. So in terms of the lead time, what's the sort of lead times you all are looking at? Because let's assume hypothetically we did a special election later on after the fall election. Again, could you give me a sense of lead times as we think about that being a possibility?
So the lead times are really dependent on the actual material, right? We're going to need structural steel much earlier on in the project. So that would be a priority where that can be 20 to 25 weeks roughly. Generators these days are running pretty close to about a year, but we wouldn't need a generator until the end of the project to obtain a certificate of occupancy and inhabit the building. So again, there's a long list of materials from the very start of the project to the very end, and they would all be prioritized through the construction manager to identify real-time lead times associated with these products, right? Again, it depends on the specific products and the manufacturers that are selected and picked. And there can be a lot of times alternate manufacturers that are selected. Electrical gear is a real hard commodity to come by these days, circuit breakers, panel boards, things of that nature. So again, there's ways to manage that through the specifications. There's also, the required on-job dates when in the construction process we actually need that material.
Jane, could you stop? Unless, Mark, do you need more screen sharing?
No.
Okay.
Diane?
So just a question on the sort of another timing question, which is when will the construction manager at risk have, actual updated bid numbers? I assume it's not by August 3rd.
Correct. John, you want to address the timing? We do have the RFQ out, but we have to get him on board and all that. So
sure. Good evening, everybody. So, when the committee decided to move ahead with CM at risk, we had to go ahead and submit an application to the Inspector General's office. You don't just get to go for CM at risk right away. And if you recall, I think we came to you all at an earlier meeting and said, hey, this would be what's best. And that turnaround time took about 5 or 6 weeks instead of 8. So we did save a couple of weeks, which was great. We sent out an RFQ. It's on the street as we speak. I'm working on an addendum to it right now because of some questions we received. But the reality is those responses are due next week. We take a look at those responses and see, okay, of the firms that submitted, and we have to hopefully get more than 3. If you get less than 3, that's going to throw us a big curveball because we have to re-advertise and try again. They don't just let you go with less than 3. Let's say we have more than 3, which is what we're hoping for. We think we've sent it out to 5 right now. We kind of look at their experience, and we make sure they're qualified. And if they're qualified, then they move to the second phase of the process. They move to the RFP, the proposal phase. And then in that proposal phase, we will ask for a non-price proposal and a price proposal. And the non-price proposal is basically a written plan of how they would do this project based upon some parameters we give them. Basically a duration of, that we think the project's going to take and an approximate start time of when that is. And then you say, well, wait a minute, how can they price this project? We haven't, the design isn't done. Well, what they're pricing is actually is their fee, which is essentially the profit they will make on the job. Usually ranges between 1 to 2.5%. So, and we use the estimated construction amount that's in that you saw on Mark's slide, that top number. That gives them a basis to kind of lock in what their profit would be. We also get their what's called general conditions number. We get their management, basically the cost to have construction manager X on the job every month for the duration, which we're tagging around 16 to 18 months right now. And they tell us, here's how much we're going to charge you for a superintendent and for a project manager and for the trailers and kind of all these things, so that we can get an idea of all of the non-trade items that are going to go into the project. The trade stuff comes later when they actually bid the work. But that way we get to compare, one, the presentation of the non-price proposal, both in words and then in writing, and then in person. It's the benefit of doing CM at risk. You actually get to interview the people that are going to build your project, as opposed to design, bid, build, where you might get to pre-qualify, but you never get to meet them. So in this case, we'll get to meet the team, assess their written plan, assess their interview, rank them, and then open up their envelope that shows costs and see how those two match up. And in a perfect world, the one that the committee feels is the best candidate is also the lowest price. That process will probably take us until the very beginning of August, second week of August. So we're going to, and then we're going to get them on board and say, go and do this estimate. Now, we're going to make those plans available to all of the folks who are qualified. Again, public information. The design, as we said, is about an 80%, 85%. So we'll make those plans available. And our hope is that because all of these folks will want to get this project, they're going to dig into those plans so that when we do award it, it's not like they're cracking the drawings for the first day. And in fact, they really have to look at those drawings to do a good non-price proposal, a good non-price presentation to show the committee that, yeah, we've looked at the project, we understand what the challenges are, here's what we would make for suggestions. That's what makes a good back and forth. But I think, if a regularly scheduled town meeting is coming, it's going to be tight, and we're going to get them in for a tight window. If the thought is to push this off to a certain degree for an amount of time, gives us more time, absolutely. And that's more benefit, more time that we have them for pre-construction before locking in a number, which is great too. So there's benefits, if you wait, costs are going to go up because you're waiting, but you're going to get more time with the CM. If you go sooner, you're going to have less time with the CM, but we're going to try to squeeze that window a little bit shorter. So there's positives and negatives for both, but we're in the middle of what's probably a 5 to 6 week procurement process of actually getting someone in the seat to help us out.
Okay. Thank you, John. Paul.
Very nice presentation and thank you. I'm really bottom line oriented. And, you know, one thing I will say about costs is they go up and everybody's assuming they're going up. The economy is cyclical. At some point they will come down. I'd also like to consider, you know, it's just, again, I'll compliment your presentation. Is everything included in that guesstimate? It may be in soft costs or something like that. Like you mentioned, I think it was Carolyn or Mark mentioned, you know, taking the town employees, moving them, locating suitable temporary structures and that. Is that included in the soft costs in that sheet
Yes.
that lay out? I'm just.
Yeah,
Yes.
there's a couple
Yes.
$100,000 in there, Paul,
All
for,
right,
for
that's-
just for rental somewhere else. And there had been some, again, the problem with an item like that is it's very time driven. What's available in town at the time when the projects actually go. So as we know, we're getting closer, you know, Michelle and company can actually go and look and say, yeah, you know, we've got to find seats for 10 people, 15 people. I think one of the places, I forget the addresses now, but kind of did a litmus test on this, you know, 6, 8, 10 months ago. What was available kind of as spaces on 3A, looked at some places, some town-owned buildings to see if there would be some capacity and some locations where maybe you could put trailers, but trailers cost money, you know, so is it easier to just rent office space? So short answer is yes, that stuff is in there. There's contingencies in there. We, you know, like you know, our job is to look at the total project budget. I don't want to talk about appropriations and that sort of thing. Let's start with getting a good bottom line number. And then that bottom line number, then we can take away, okay, here's what we get for appropriation 1, appropriation 2, CPC, and kind of get down to the actual remaining cost for you guys. But it's our job to make sure that we're trying to think of as much stuff as we think we're going to encounter, make sure it's in there, and then not be so conservative that it's a crazy number, but not so tight to the vest that the margin is razor thin. And that ties your hands in other ways later. So kind of find that sweet spot.
You make it lucky, John. As I said, the economy is cyclical. And,
Yep.
you know, if you come out with the final figure, you know, town may get lucky and the price of drops in a sense. So
Yeah, well, and it's a great point. So here's
again,
the thing.
possibilities. That's
Yeah,
all.
80% through design, you would be buying this stuff soon, you know, but that doesn't mean that you're buying all of it right away. The process, unlike design bid build, with CM at risk, there are half of the trades are considered trade contracts, same as what in a non-CM project would be called filed subbidders. Electrical, mechanical, plumbing, all of those folks, and those are hard bid, and it's what's contained in their specs. There's really no discussion, there's no buyout. The big difference with CM is the whole other half of the job, site, carpentry, you know, a whole host of the other half of trades. We get to participate in buyout meetings. We get to make sure that, and we get to see bid A, bid B, bid C, and participate in that buyout. So a couple of things, we get to make sure that risk isn't being buried in those numbers. And if it is, we can take it on as the owner and kind of hold it aside and not just give the roofer, roof is a bad example, not just give the site guy an extra $500,000 for ledge he might encounter. We hold it aside and we monitor it as opposed to someone making a windfall. You know, so we're aware of it and we understand the risk. There's the CM at risk part, but we don't just give it to somebody. We're a design bid build contractor with one number on bid day. You don't know how much they've padded their number. So I agree with you. Labor is the only thing that never goes down, but you're right. You know, we're starting to see a little bit of recovery, like some of the times for some of the, like windows were getting into the 30 week category. They're coming back down into the 20s. We'd love to see them even less. But again, all of that stuff plays in.
Thank you. Thank you, John. By point of information, the elevator in the annex has failed, cannot be replaced. We're going to be looking into moving people sooner than later because anything that requires public access has to be on the first floor. And this is, I mean, that's just permanent. So people should be aware we might have a little bit of speed up on moving people around if the town goes forward on that. But in any event, the town is faced with a elevator that cannot be repaired. It's prohibitively expensive to try to put a new one in. It doesn't make any sense. Anyway, I just wanted to put that out. Other comments from the board? Brian Host has his hand up. Let's let Brian in.
Jack, I actually did not intend to have my hand up. I don't know if that was left over or if the screen just got bumped.
No, well, you're important. We wanted to hear, but that's all right.
Brian, problem
So-
solved. I demoted you quickly.
All right, so do we have any comments? Is there anybody in the audience who'd like to comment on this? Okay, so my sense is that we have, by the way, I've been to a number of the town hall study group meetings, very impressive, very efficient, well thought out. Phil and Carolyn and Mark and the other board members did a very, very good professional job. So I think that we're getting the information, accurate information that the town needs to make a decision. So I want you to thank all of you for your help. Are there any other comments from the board? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's move on to roads and sidewalks. Chris, were we able to get people from Roads and Sidewalk here? Give us an update.
Brian, sure, there he is. There's Brian. Brian is here.
There he is.
I'm just going to step away from my camera and listen for 1 minute.
All right.
Gotta let the dog out.
Yeah. Hey, Brian.
Good evening, everybody.
Okay.
You all doing? So roads and sidewalks. I see Chief is with us as well. So we had a meeting last week with the planning group and the Elm Street Corridor group. And after a lot of discussion, the group voted on option 1, which is the parking on the south side of the street. And
Can we show that?
let's see.
Hey, Brian, just so we stick to the order of the agenda, maybe we should
Sure.
talk about the existing plans for paving first, which is listed on the agenda. We don't want to skip that because I know that there's some people who I think would be interested in that. So I just want to make sure we go through it.
All right, so I'll go on those, but if Michelle or anyone's in the audience there with the plan of option 1, I could talk about the other stuff rather than searching for that.
Yeah.
All right,
Good
so existing plans for paving Sawyer Street. If you've gone up it recently, you've seen that the sidewalk, the new sidewalk from Fair Oaks Lane down to Route 3A has been graded. It has a sub drain in pursuant to the Concom requirement for the sidewalk. Sawyer Street in its entirety will be paved this year. And that new sidewalk will be installed. The sidewalk on that new sidewalk section is permeable pavement. The rest of the sidewalk will be an overlay and then ADA compliant ramps where necessary. There'll also be some modification to the crosswalk where students cross in the morning to the schools. The curb line didn't match up exactly where the crosswalk is, so that's going to be rectified. Pond Street, National Grid is.
Hey, Brian, I'm sorry to
Go
interrupt.
ahead. Yep.
Just to clarify for the public, so this means all of Sawyer Street sidewalks are going to be done. There'll be a brand new one, and then the sidewalks that connect from the new one all the way down to Ripley Road.
Ripley
are
Road.
going to be
Those will be an overlay.
an
So
overlay.
right, so it'll be the existing sidewalk configuration, with the exception of where we need ADA compliant ramps at Ripley and Sawyer. But yes, that will be an overlay all the way up to the driveway curb cuts where they meet the sidewalk.
And just to be precise, we're not talking though about Lower Sawyer, so Sawyer from Ripley to North Main, right?
Ripley to North Main will be a new road and new overlay on the sidewalks.
Okay,
The rest of it to Main Street will be a new road,
okay,
a mill and overlay. So the entirety of Sawyer Street in the driving surface will have been paved.
okay, okay, thank you.
So any other questions on Sawyer? I will say, just while we're talking about that area, there's, and I know it's probably been talked about with the town meeting, but there is some sewer work that's going to be done. It's off-road, connecting the Cook Estates down to where the school pump station is. So if there's any discussion on that, it's not tied or to the schedule of paving or going to impact the paving schedule at all.
And what was
So
your
it's
thought
fair.
on, oh, sorry.
It's fair to say, Brian, that you've taken care of that. So if somebody asks, we can say, no, there will be no further disruption. All the work that needs to be done will have been done that would impact that paving, and any additional work will not impact that, correct?
Correct.
Okay, good. Think the people at home want to
And
hear that.
I will just preface by saying, and we talked about it before, there's our road regulations. We have a 10-year protection plan on our roads. So once we pave this street, we have a 5-year strict moratorium on no cutting the road. So if there is a gas service or something that somebody wants to do in the road right now, they should notify us immediately. And we could help, facilitate National Grid in doing a service or something like that to get it done before we get the paving done. Because once it's down, it's a strict 5-year moratorium, and then after that, from year 6 to 10, it's a fee to open the street.
Okay. Jane, did you have,
Uh,
and Diane, do you have a question?
Yeah, Diane
Jane?
has her hand up first.
Oh, Diane.
Just, my question is to that, and it relates to our communication strategy in terms of notifying residents and about this. Like, is there any way to basically proactively, because a lot of people aren't necessarily on the same social media platforms or checking things out. But this is kind of one of those things that a lot of people are surprised, whether they should be or not, that it takes them by surprise that they can't do that. And similarly, when people come and get building permits, it might be worth noting that there are, if it's for a property on Sawyer Street, for example, that, you got to do your work before X, or you can't do any work, hooking up to gas. Because that's part of the problem. And a lot of it's with homes that already exist, and then they get sold and somebody redoes them and they have no idea about the moratorium. So anything we can do to pass that information along directly to people would be appreciated.
So we've been sending letters out usually a year prior to, our next year's paving schedule. So, for next year, the roads that we'll talk about tonight, we send mass letters to everyone on the street. They're not certified, but there are mailings, and then there's notice on the website and at select board meetings.
I definitely think, because as much as we like to think we're popular, and we are with a lot of people, I definitely think if the building department can take some role, whether it's just something they hand people with their building packets, kind of a list of moratoriums that exist, or a place to point people to through a QR code or something, I think it'd be very helpful.
And I might add that probably some strategically placed signs, because anybody who's going to see those signs, and we just put 1 or 2 up. But anyway, Jean and then Paul.
Yeah, just a quick question. When exactly is the rest of Sawyer going to be paved for folks who are interested?
So Sawyer, once we start work with the milling operation, it's going to be done in its entirety.
No, but like But when, like August, September?
So we've ordered the curb. We're waiting on the curbing to be done. So the curbing will be set first and then the paving crews will come in. They'll do the mill. And then a couple of weeks after the milling, within a couple of weeks after the milling, we'll have all of the castings reset, and then they'll come in with a level course and an overlay.
Do you expect this to be done this summer?
That's the intention. It's all subject to the curbing availability, which has been ordered. So our intent is to get everything done before school starts.
Okay. Well,
I was just following with what Diane was saying, but that might, the communication may work well with our new webpage. We keep following up with that, get that up and set that up for townwide communication, easy access, and that would fit in nicely if you had DPW with their own site on that page, be able to send out quote unquote alerts. And Brian, just a question, when did you say that the curbs would be supposed to be coming in? What's the time lag on that?
It was 6 or 8 weeks, and it was ordered probably about 3 weeks ago. We had to finalize the shop drawings with the contractor, so I anticipate probably in a month. The contractor is receiving the curbs.
So you're pretty comfortable saying that the soil will be done by start of school?
I'm comfortable right now in the 1st of July, the 7th of July.
yeah, a brave man, indeed, a brave man.
Yeah. Unless we get, weeks of rain.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's it's construction season. So we are sharing this consortium contractor with, multiple other communities, but we've had them out there multiple times and multiple discussions on getting it done before school starts. So that's where we stand.
Mhm. Okay. Other comments for Jane?
Yeah, to follow up more precisely, I think on what Diane and Paul are both saying, and I don't think this is for Brian to do, but I think Chris, if you could get Justin to maybe consider a communications plan to roll out this information on the streets that we're talking about, Sawyer, Beechwood, Pond Street, just to alert residents on all the different media platforms so they know, including they know about the gas work issue that Brian referenced, which is really, really important, that like now is the window, if it even still exists, to be frank. And so, Chris,
So,
if you could work with Justin on that, that would be great.
I'll just say the window is closed, but if somebody is listening and they need a gas service, usually it's if they need a gas service, we can facilitate getting it in the next few weeks with National Grid before we pave.
Just to add to
Go ahead, Diane.
You're mute.
Go ahead, Diane.
all right, this is why the prioritization is so important a year out, so that we can, accommodate residents in whatever their building or, utility hookup plans are, so.
Okay, Brian, we've got Beechwood and Mill Lane and Sidewalk overview. And the other question that I have gotten is people trying to understand what King Street Sidewalk is all about and where it actually goes.
So King Street Sidewalk is just a concept that we've talked about at meetings such as this. There's no design out there. But the concept is to connect Beechwood Street to Route 3A by the Stop and Shop Plaza lights. So the sidewalk, looking at the layout of the road, would likely be on the west side, mostly the reservoir side. And there'd be a bridge crossing at a stream, and the majority of it would be on the edge of the road on that west side, all the way up to the lights right before the entrance to the park there. So
Is there demand for that? One of the questions I hear frequently is, Why do you plan to do that? Is there a great demand? Is there a need? Is there a,
So I've received several emails for several years requesting this, and I know the board probably has passed on a few of those. So it's also been in the planning board's list of sidewalks as a top priority.
okay,
And it does, effectively with the sidewalk we're adding on Sawyer Street, if you added this piece on King Street, you could walk all the way from, the Beechwood ball field on a sidewalk to the center of town. And that includes, the school kids going to school and all that.
okay. Paul?
I'm just wondering about the priorities, because I've also heard Brian Ann on the planning board, people have a great interest in Jerusalem and Atlantic. It's one of the most, it's walked, it's busy, a lot of curves, a lot of turns, quite easily room to get hit. But I've heard a heck of a lot of interest in that, especially on planning, people asking about that, being able to walk along the Atlantic Ocean. Even though you're surrounded by some woods and properties, but as a beginning, any thought given to that on your end?
So other than concept discussion, there hasn't been a lot of thought. The problem with that section of road, it's so tight, and there's a lot of properties that are right up near the roadway. It would probably require perhaps some takings. The road layout of King Street is wide. The properties are generally set back with large, bigger lawns. So I think it's an easier installation on King Street. Jerusalem Road has its challenges with the curves, like you said, and also with the property. If we did have to do a taking, even with eminent domain, you have to pay fair market value, and it would be, I can tell you just from doing Cunningham Bridge and some temporary easements we had to do out there, it's a lot of money.
Diane?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to talk about that too. And with respect to King Street, it would be great to have a sidewalk conversation because, from what, maybe like a public forum where, we just get a lot of input or do a presentation where people understand that it's not as simple as, sorry, my select cat is having a little bit of fun. It's not as simple. Everybody would like a sidewalk in front of their house. And there's, we have to prioritize some of the roads, and we're talking, millions and millions of dollars. Some require, Concom or some kind of serious environmental work and engineering. Others, like Jerusalem and Atlantic, we would have to do so much land taking. I mean, we're talking tens of millions of dollars just on paying off, abutting neighbors. So it would be just great to understand really what it takes to make a decision and kind of, a column that says, this is why this hasn't risen to the priority list, because it's frankly impractical from a financial point of view, but to let people understand both how these decisions get made, and to also bring to our attention, sidewalk issues and concerns that might not be on our radar. And another thing that I think we always have to keep in mind is, when we build sidewalks, it's a very huge investment. I look at Forest Ave, and when you don't take care of them, it becomes even more of a challenge. When weeds are coming up and they start cracking, and then you have to do the overlays. So it's just a bigger conversation.
Yeah, be careful, Diane. You might get appointed to be a working group of one to look at that.
No, thanks.
I thought that would be the answer. By the way,
Private ways, I'm all over.
Yeah, your select cat has not passed the ethics, so they'll have to do the ethics thing. Paul?
So I'm just going to throw one more out there, say from the corner down to Jerusalem, down to Rocky Beach. You have existing sidewalks there. They degraded, and I realized the ledge over by, Black Rock, but, perhaps some lanes, which I don't think it would be a huge expense, walking lanes just around it, just as a guideline. I'm just putting it out there for prioritization, not just that in particular, but I think that's, drawing people down to the beach, walking, pedestrian, and you have existing sidewalk there. I just want to put it out there on the table, because Jerusalem's a hell of a nice walk if you walk down to Maria's to get a sub and walk up to Rocky Beach.
Okay. I think, Gene? You're muted, Gene.
I just wanted to highlight that Mr. McGowan has his hand up. I think this is intending to make a comment, but also I wanted to make sure we didn't lose the discussion on Pond or Beechwood either, in terms of the existing plans, because I just want to make sure those people know, what's going on in their streets as we sort of write our list down of, future sidewalks as well.
Yeah, we're on Pond, are we? Or on both of those, Ryan?
So Pond Street was paved in recent years. Before we pave any streets, we go to all utilities saying, do you have any business in the road in the next 10 years or so? And the answer was no. Since that time, there's been a significant amount of gas services added in town, and a significant amount of whole house generators also added. And the demand load in town was not anticipated at the time we did it. So National Grid anticipates having maybe pressure problems unless they increase the size of the diameter of the pipe that goes down, which is a main feeder down Pond Street. So part of the we've agreed to let them do it, provided that they pave in full from curb to curb the entire street again. And generally what we do is we get a price point on what that costs, and it's our option whether we want to receive a check from them or we allow them to do the paving curb to curb. In recent negotiations, we've taken the money and then we use our contractor, which is usually better priced than National Grid's paving crew. So at any rate, Pond Street is starting. You may see some markouts out there and some test pits, but they, similar to Sawyer Street, have been told to be in and out and done before school starts. But so there'll be a trench patch out there until we do the, again, curb to curb replacement of Pond Street for that 1,800 feet of main that they need to increase. And that will happen next year after the trench settles.
Okay, so we're clear on Pond. And what about anybody else? Any comments on Pond? And then we'll discuss Beechwood. Okay. What's going on Beechwood, Brian?
Beechwood Street, there's a bid on the street right now to replace the older water main from King Street to roughly the bridge before Mill Lane, the dam at Mill Lane. And that construction is anticipated, the bids should be received by in August, and the construction should be in the fall. That trench, similar to the gas trench, will settle over the winter, and then that section from Mill Lane to Route 3A will be paved next season.
Okay. Very helpful to know. Very helpful to know. One of the things in the board we might want to consider is just having a little tab on our town website on road, this type of stuff. I think it'll save everybody a lot of time responding to emails, and I think the public would really appreciate it to know what's going on. Other comments, Paul? And then Diane.
Brian, just for my clarification. So you said you're going to pay paving probably next year from, did you say from Mill down to 3A? Just, and forgive me, I may have misunderstood you.
Yeah, so Mill Lane will also be paved, and Beechwood will be paved from Mill Lane to Route 3A by the Shaw's Plaza there.
So what happens from Mill to Dome?
Mill to Doan it's a fairly new street. There's no utility work, and that there's no anticipated paving of that in the short term.
All right, no, thank you.
Diane?
A quick question. Have we had like an MAPC study recently on roads and sidewalks? I mean, I seem to recall one maybe in the last 5 years, but
I
But
think
whatever,
you're
it's just a
right.
question to think about.
Diane,
As we have a bigger conversation, what has been analyzed in the past and where do we go from here?
Chris, do you have an answer for that?
I was going to say, Brian is currently working with a consultant, and that study's due out next week. So that's a look at the condition of every one of our roads. So we'll have that data, right, sometime next week or the week after, Brian?
Yeah, so to Diane's question, so MAPC, I think, so their type study would be kind of on a planning effort needs on where, I guess, planning on where should we plan for roads and sidewalks, but the consultant that's doing a report for us right now is doing a condition assessment of all of our public streets and going to delivering that report on the 15th, on Friday the 15th is the due date.
Great,
So
fantastic.
that'll give us a condition assessment of all the streets to use as a tool on our planning efforts and capital planning efforts for roads.
Would that interface with Safe Streets? And could you explain to people at home what Safe Streets is?
So Complete Streets.
Complete Streets, I'm sorry.
Yeah, Complete Streets is a DOT initiative for
Department of
pedestrian, bicyclists, and safety, shared roads. There's also the what am I thinking of? The ADA compliant. You can get grants for accessibility, pedestrian, and not so much bicyclists, but pedestrian accessibility and ADA compliant sidewalks. It's what we did on the Common. We had a grant for $350,000 to help pay for that project a couple of years ago. But generally, the concept is sidewalk, bike lane, vehicular travel lane, and then sidewalk on the other side. The problem with old towns like ours is the road layout doesn't support, 2 sidewalks, 2 travel lanes, and a bike lane. It's a pretty big width.
Okay, so if it won't take that thing, we're not eligible.
No, I think if you put out a design that does improve pedestrian and bicycle access and safety, and within the road layout, I think they'll take it into consideration.
Mhm. But for the short term, we're not going to be doing that, and we just should be aware that potentially down the line, that might be an avenue we wish to explore. Other comments?
I would only say that I think, Brian, it's fair to conclude that all the work that's going on is already paid for, whether National Grid is paying for it out of their pocket or we have the money allocated. And so I to that point, I might ask Chris Senior or you, Brian, if you want to talk about the different sources of how much money we have right now, because I think we actually have more money than we may realize to do future street work for all of these streets that we're now trying to consider out of this pool of money, which is significant, although our demands are significant. And so I think, Chris, I don't know if you want to talk about that now in terms of how much money we have and how that works.
And I would add to that. I believe in the various accounts we have maybe like some estimates have seen like $1.2 million of funds that are available that have not been spent. And if there is, it'd be helpful either now or later to understand how that dynamic would work out. Go ahead, Chris.
Brian could give you more specifics on the individual road projects. I don't have the project by project breakdown like this. So just as a higher end overview, there's 33 miles of road, roughly, public ways. And Brian can correct me if I'm misstating this, is to do about, to have them on a 20-year cycle. So it's about a mile and a half a year. And that's $500,000, $550,000. We've historically put about $300,000 aside, and road repaving was baked into the capital plan when we did our reassessment of the plan a few years back. also gets about $219,000 a year from the state. It's a formula that involves public road miles, population, and employment in town. That formula really hasn't changed much in a number of years. Unfortunately, the funding hasn't changed much in a number of years. So we get around 220. Sometimes if there was a little bone, if there's a bad winter to help do repair stuff. So the combined, we get about 520, 550, depending on the year. And that basically pays for the roughly mile and a half. Am I getting that right, Brian?
Yeah, that's correct. I would just say that the budget that we have out there, if you saw the chapter 90 budget, so Sawyer Street, let me get the exact figures here.
And I wasn't suggesting we need exact numbers, just so I'm looking at numbers just for the public's awareness that we have.
Yes, so all the money is accounted for projects that are ongoing right now. Our chapter 90 funding is roughly around 670. The Sawyer Street is going to be roughly 750. Again, that's a mixture of funding. And then our road funding budget through the big capital budget and town meeting, that will be used on Beechwood Street and Mill Lane and other streets that are planned. So I think, discussion of future, roads and paving, we also need to talk about appropriation for those, because the funding that we have right now is accounted for to be used.
Okay, that's really what I'm trying to get at, because I've heard in some of the accountings, we'll see that we have money sitting in accounts, and the answer that you're giving now apparently is that, yes, there is money sitting there, but it's already been allocated.
Correct.
Okay, just wanted to clarify. Thank you. Diane,
There's lots of members of the public with their hands up. I just want to make sure we get to them.
Okay, I'm not seeing that, but.
Jack, if you want, I can let people in the order that they've been raising hands.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, okay. I'm going to allow Mr. McGowan in first. You're promoted, Mr. McGowan, if you want to unmute. Unless maybe the hand was not intentional.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm going to say that this is a kind of restricted Zoom site. I don't know who's on the site. I don't know who's waiting. And anyway, so I just wanted to just bring up on behalf of the sewer board that if the paving of South Main goes ahead, we are restricted for 5 years from doing any kind of regional sewer with Situate. And I would like the select board to consider that. I don't know how far away we are from getting an agreement, but we've had a couple of meetings. The second one was fantastic and very positive. But I would hate to be constrained by paving South Main and then finding out that we can't do anything for 5 years.
Okay, thank you, Bill. Bill, one question on that subject. We have discussed that. We really do want to think people getting it paved, but if you were and sewering, but if you were to put a oversized pipe in underneath it before we paved South Main to provide service to South Main Street, which needs sewer, my understanding is it possible to have a pipe put in that's of sufficient size? So if the decision is made down the line, we could do that? And might that not be prudent anyway, just looking forward?
Well, right now we have asked Woodard & Curran to give us an updated cost estimate for doing just that. And we're all, I drive down that piece of road and it's like, driving down a bunch of broken teeth. So, I mean, I understand it, but at the same time, if that gets paved, we can't do anything for 5 years. And I've been working on regional sewer for 9. I don't have it in me for going for another 5 years. So I would ask the board to please consider that the sewer board has been working very hard to do a couple of things. One is the sewer self-main. It's not just to do with that, it's to clean up the Gulf, which I would think is high on your priority list as well. And to make sure that, you know, the stuff that goes on at Bassing's Beach and the closures and this and that are you know, basically, they're just eliminated because of what we can do with that. Situate's going to pay for everything. There's not going to be any burden to the town. It's just a matter of if we push it out, or at least coordinate what we're doing with what the town wants to do. Because if the town wants to do it, that'll be a killer. If you pave it before we finish this, and I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you, Bill.
All right.
Jean? Well, wait a minute, we have the Jean, and then I cannot see who might be waiting. If any members of the
Jean and Diane are probably waiting to ask Mr. McGowan a question, and then I've got
Okay.
a list of people waiting. Real quick, Mr. McGowan, what's your time?
Please call me Bill. I've been around too long to be called Mr. McGowan.
So Bill, what is your timeline? And which I know is a real, you know, shaking the magic 8-ball, but just so we have a sense of, you know, timeline for decision. Has that come up in discussions with Situate? I recall last time they had some pretty hard deadlines they were working towards. Do you have a sense?
They've given us no deadlines. We had a meeting probably within the last month where they were looking at grants and things of that nature. I suspect it's going to, you know, probably within a year that we would start this. It would be my desire, actually, if that happened. They are very much on board, and as I said, they will pay for this. And we have the things that have to happen. I don't want to get into a sewer discussion right now, and I would actually like you to invite us to a select board meeting, so we can actually go through this whole thing. But basically, it's going to be to get Wood and Curran's updated cost estimate, to have a discussion between the town managers with Hull as far as what they want to charge, and then we start looking at going out to bid. So is that a year or a year and a half? I don't know, but I think that is, in my opinion, I'd like to do it faster than not.
Diane, Paul, but I just have a point of information. Diane?
My question was really a suggestion, which is that we get the sewer board on a very soon agenda so we can have an update on status, which Bill suggested. So thank you.
Done. Bill, point of information. Sewering South Main, are you prepared to sewer the homes in South Main?
Well, by default, yes. I mean, we're going to put a pipe down. We suspect that everybody that's on the Gulf is going to want to connect. But if the other people on the other side don't want to, I mean, we can't force them to do that. It's not like Little Harbor. There's no federal mandate to do that.
Okay, just want to clarify. So once we put the pipe in, if they hook up later, they hook up later. But the
Yes.
urgency is getting that pipe in, and that if we're bogged down in discussions with Situate, we're going to have to put a pipe in there to serve the Cohasset residents anyway. We just make sure that the pipe is large enough. So if we do cut a deal with Situate, it would be sufficient. Is that accurate?
Well, sort of. I don't think we're going to bog down. They
Okay.
have several alternatives like I&I and things of that, which would take them 8 to 10 years to give the type of service that we would be able to give them. So I think they know, without giving up all my negotiation strategies, they know that we are the best solution. And if it doesn't cost us anything, and it improves the water quality of the harbor, I don't know why we wouldn't do it.
Okay, but we'll discuss that later. Paul?
I'd venture to say we're the only solution, but I would say this is a pretty heavy topic. I would suggest, going on with Diane, that this is a subject for another full meeting, because this is a tri-town agreement going from Cohasset, Situate to Hull, and it seems to me they need us, but I think the town should be fully informed of
And no
what
doubt, I
these
mean,
proposals are, Mr. McGowan, and I would say this, pardon me. Yeah, this is subject probably almost for a full meeting. So, we're talking roads and sidewalks here. I think I'd put this aside for another day because there's gonna be a lot of opinions on this.
Yeah, I
And
think,
I think that people have to be fully informed. That's
no
my.
doubt. No, we've been fully aware of that. We wanted to have sort of informational meetings and sessions like that. I mean,
Have you had them?
no, not yet, because we don't know, we haven't gotten really over the, we haven't really started. So no, nothing, none of that. But we know that as part of the full sort of implementation, negotiation, all of these sort of strategies have to include the public. Now, the thing that's good about this is that if we put this pipe down the street, it doesn't obviate anybody to connect to it.
But we're tying our fortunes to Situate Health, so that's, I'm just saying.
No, actually, we're not.
That
Situate's
is
going through us, Hull is paying, Situate is paying Hull, and I don't want to get into this because it would be
That's
good
why
to have
I'm-
all.
can I,
It's a topic for
excuse
another
me.
meeting is what I was
Yeah.
getting.
Yes, yeah,
excuse
exactly.
me, we will, again, this is a topic for another meeting. We're not going to do that. We got the information that we need as far as the impact on roads and streets. And thank you, Bill, and Paul, you're right, and I think Diane also, it was Diane's idea, so let's give her credit, but we will have to discuss this. And I've spent a lot of time on this. It does require a lot of stuff. So anyway, let's go to the people who are waiting in line very patiently.
Okay, I'm promoting Miss Richards. Miss Richards. Miss Richard.
Address.
Miss Richard, you've been promoted. I think you've unmuted. Okay, I think you're ready, Miss Richard.
I see she's muted.
Yeah, no, she's not.
No, she is not muted now. I see the hand up, but we're not hearing anything.
Yeah.
Well, let's move on to the next person and they can call back if necessary or raise their hand.
Okay.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello,
Hi, this is Tori Hanna.
your address, Tori?
I'm at 304 King Street.
Okay,
And I wanted to clarify, on the agenda, the King Street sidewalk inquiry had come onto the agenda based off of an email I had sent. I think there's some confusion around the King Street sidewalks in the plans that you guys have put out there in terms of 3A being called King Street. This one in particular we're talking about King Street, the area that you guys are rerouting right now off of 3A onto King Street, all the way down to Beechwood. That's the area, we have a group on here. That's the area we would like to have consideration around possible sidewalks. And it's strictly out of safety concerns, and we can give you a slew of reasons from lots of school-age kids nowadays who we are within a mile of the schools and still have to pay for busing. They cannot walk to school safely. They can't bike to school safely at this point. We have a lot of pedestrians and bikers trying to access Whitney and Thayer Woods. They can't do that safely. And especially during this time where we're rerouting onto King Street from Main Street, which was not the only information our neighborhood got on that was a posting that was done through Facebook, which a lot of people aren't on Facebook at this point in time. And so there was no awareness, but all of a sudden we got a slew of traffic coming down the road. And I clocked somebody at 58 the other day. We've been putting out the orange signs, they've all been hit. So there's a massive safety concern. You guys have also done your work and your research identifying that this is an area where a lot of accidents have happened, pedestrians, bicycle, car accidents on a consistent basis. And so we would like that to be under consideration as we do talk through sidewalk possibilities going forward.
And Tori, you're talking about basically from where you live on King Street up to 3A and then to the schools? Is that what that?
Well, you from 3A across from the Stop and Shop, that King Street entrance to
Yes.
Beechwood, across
Okay.
Pond Street to Beechwood, and then also connecting Pond from the water treatment center area, King Street, down into 3A.
So
And
essentially-
enabling that crosswalk to actually be productive for kids to safely cross.
So what you're saying is that that there's an issue. It's kind of like a almost like a Y. It's not really, or a T, where you want it from Beechwood all the way to Stop and Shop, and then from the water plant to 3A, which would allow you to cross the street and access the high school, correct?
The middle school and high school.
Middle school and high school, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, just wanted to clarify.
Jasper? Hey,
Okay, well, thank you very much. And you sent some information. I know I've read that. And, you know, Brian, at some point, you know, we probably want to get an idea if that's feasible, and we can't. So at some point you might want to let us know.
What are next
The
steps?
board,
How does that happen? Like,
So
When- Brian, go ahead, answer.
I would say, so a brand new sidewalk down King Street would require an engineering firm to do a full survey and concept design and design development to bid documents.
and Brian, I had heard that that had all been done because as part of opening up the train down the Cohasset train, knowing that everyone comes off of 3A and comes over to King Street in order to avoid 2 traffic lights, I had heard originally that engineering work had been done and funds had been allocated to King Street to getting sidewalks on King Street to make it safe.
Yeah, I have not seen any design work on that. It would need to be a full survey. I mean, the town has a flyover survey. We could start there for the concept design, but there's no design in place for that
And
sidewalk.
is there a way to look into those allocation of funds from years ago when the train system was put in and approved?
I think that's a Chris question.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
I
think
think that's a Chris question. And if you don't have that information, Chris, you know, at some point, it'd be good if, just to find out whether that's happened or not, and get back to Tori on that.
Yeah, and I think to answer the broader question, the process that we're going through right now is taking in public input, including yours, as to all the different priorities and needs across town. As you probably heard, right now, we have in the budget 550,000 each year, unless we get a grant or some other money to pay for a road or sidewalk for whatever specific reason the road or sidewalk gets that money for. And so one of the issues that we've been considering is whether we need new money in order to fund more sidewalks and potentially roads, and how the math plays out, particularly once we line up all the priorities and needs, which we know are relatively substantial. And this is why we're going through a lot of these roads in detail, and also taking in public comment to see what the needs on the ground are. And we'll probably continue doing that. And then I think the intent, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jack, is to start making some decisions once we intake all of this information, including both as to a paving schedule that includes roads, if we want to make any decisions about reconstruction or new sidewalks, in addition to the existing work already being done, then we make those decisions, and then we need to go and seek the money, whether through town meeting or at a ballot vote, depending on the source of funding, to essentially fund those plans. And so that's generally the process that we're going through right now. Is that a fair summary, Jack?
Yeah, that's very, very succinct. Thank you. And Tori, just so you know, one of the reasons why we're having more select board meetings is do exactly this, to be open so the citizens can come in, they can watch how we talk back and forth, and you can participate. You raise your hand and you bring up, and Tori, by the way, that was a very good explanation. We appreciate that. And welcome to the process. We'll have you on a board or commission before you know it.
Welcome, Ed. Thank you, guys.
All right, thank you. Any other comments on this?
I
Do we
have
have, yeah, go
two
ahead.
more people in the audience, Jack.
All right.
I'm going to promote our former fire chief, Mr. Sylvia. Bob. Okay, you're on.
Thank you, and thank you, members of the board. Robert Sylvia, 65 Forest Avenue, just a citizen. Just as a little bit of institutional knowledge, the question came up earlier in regards to studies that were done in streets and roads. The MAPC did a study, which you can find on the town website. I believe, if I look very quickly here, it's under transportation and circulation. It says transportation element, final draft 425 of 19. You can find that. They did a study of streets, sidewalks, and more importantly, possible funding sources. So all of that's been done. I would just remind the board that you might want to take a hard look at this before we march down any of these avenues that we've been talking about, because there's no need to recreate the wheel. There was quite a few citizens that were involved in this. I was involved in it as a citizen, not as the fire chief. And I know the chairman of the board sat through some of these meetings that I was in. So
Yes, indeed.
He's fully aware of this also.
Yeah.
So I would just bring that to your attention, and anybody that's on this meeting, you might want to take a look at this, because it did talk about things as Select Board Member Grady mentioned. They mentioned Atlantic Ave, Jerusalem Road. They prioritized things that came into play, and it's an interesting read in that regard, that you may see that, and again, I don't think 4 years back is that stale, so that you can take a hard look at it, see what's there, but more importantly, at the funding, possible funding sources, which I think is more important than anything else. So thank you for your time tonight. And with that, I am over.
Very good. Thank you, Chief Sylvia, former Chief Sylvia. And yes, I thought I remembered those meetings. Paul, I think we have, let's get all the.
Just a point on that, what Chief Sylvia said, that may be something that we may be able to get Justin to pull out of there and put that up on the Cohasset webpage and launch that up, just so people take a look at it. Just part of the process, Jack.
Good idea. Good idea. Anyway, Gene, who else do we have? Oh, Tanya. You're muted, so unmute yourself and identify with your.
Hey, so this is Justin, Tanya's husband, Justin Wilson, and we live at 468 King Street. I appreciate everyone's time today, and I enjoyed hearing everyone's thoughts back and forth. I live on King Street, and I just want to say that the street is it's a massive go-between. So anyone that wants to get to 3A that lives in Cohasset, they take King Street. And I tell you, we have a 7-year-old daughter and a 4-year-old daughter, and it is a drag race coming down King Street. So, I mean, I appreciate all Tori's comments, and I think it's just something that I would appreciate the board thinking about. It's no one is driving down 60 miles an hour down Atlantic Ave, right? But they are doing it down King Street. The police are there and they're monitoring it, but they're not there every day. And it's something that I think it's something that we can all think about, put ourselves in that kind of shoes. And for the greater good, it's just, no one wants that. And I think bringing Lily Pond back into something that we could all enjoy would be fantastic. And I think that's all I have to add. It's just, again, it's a scary place to live. thinking that someone's driving down 60 miles an hour past your house. It's King Street is a very pretty street. We love living here, but again, it's a fast road.
Well,
And-
thank you. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
That was it for me.
Well, thank you. I think the takeaway from that is we should be aware that that is in fact a shortcut through the back way to Norwell and Route 3. And so those are really commuter cars who have no conception they're going through a residential neighborhood. So, well, that's very helpful. Diane?
Yeah, just a couple points to wrap that up. I totally agree. And that's one of the things that come into play with prioritization of roads is whether they're cut throughs, whether they're used by people to go from one place to another. So I think it is a street that is worth looking at. And I had another thing to say, but I've lost my train of thought. And I look forward to reading the study that Chief Sylvia referred to.
Very good. Do we have anybody else waiting in line?
No.
No. Okay. Any other comments before we go to traffic safety recommendations from our police chief? Okay, we have Chief Quigley.
Hey, you guys, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Can't
But,
see you.
yeah, okay, hold on. There we go.
No, there you are.
Hey there.
Just a point of information for everybody. Evidently that under the open meeting law, that not only do you have to be on a Zoom meeting, and verbally, but also you're supposed to have your picture shown, and it can't be a static picture. They have to be able to see that you're actually there. I'm not quite sure I've tracked down how accurate that is, but I've heard it from good authority. Anyway, go
It's
ahead.
accurate.
Thank you, Diane. Of course.
So I'm here in flesh and blood. It's not a poster. I did pass along a graphic. I don't know if you guys can put it up on your screen or if he has it, but it's sort of just a snapshot of some of the enforcement activities that are going on. If one of you guys want to display that, or do you want me to?
I'm downloading it as we speak.
Oh, hold on. This will, I think I can do it.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Perfect.
Get two screens going here. So this is just a look at the last year for
You have
traffic.
to share your other screen, Chief. It's moved on. We're seeing your desktop.
Get it now?
Yes, yep.
Okay, cool. So we've done some work over the last couple of years with the speed limits and changing some signage. And the average posted speed in town is 27 miles per hour. The average violator speed, the people get stopped, the average speed is 42 miles an hour. From June 30th, 2021 till June 30th, 2022, the last 1 year period, the officers have issued 2,431 citations. That's a ton of citations for a department our size. I can tell you that the enforcement is constant, but people have to have, the expectations have to be realistic at the same time. We are running from call to call, and in between calls and writing reports, we're doing traffic and parking and school security and myriad other things. We're operating with generally 3 officers on a shift. There's a sergeant and 2 sector officers, and the sergeants have collateral duties, whether it's training or public records requests, licensing, special events, scheduling details, or just working on some type of project, whether it's a grant or something else. So the bulk of the work is being done with the 2 sector officers. So although we would like to be everywhere for everyone, it's just not possible. You'd need a huge staff, and it's not feasible. So we do the best we can. Add to that the parking complaints that are nonstop. And just in the last 6 months, I ran the numbers. last week, we've issued 363 parking tickets for a total of $15,940 in fines. So there's a lot of work being done. There's definitely more work to be done, but I think, the solution is not, it's multifaceted. It's education, it's enforcement, but I think the main thing is engineering. Some of these roads, we have to have calming, measures put in place, whether it's islands, better signage. The signage is not great around town. It hasn't been updated in 20 some odd years. We're talking about King Street, Upper King as we call it, with those good folks that just were on. We're talking about, we added that four-way stop at King and Pond probably about 20 years ago, and that slowed people down. We've sort of narrowed the road and put a guardrail in along with the water treatment plant is. So I think it's going to take more engineering. The addition of islands, different islands in road diets, cutting down the lane a little bit to put a squeeze on people. And those are the things that actually, they consistently make a difference. Enforcement is just, it is what it is. It's sporadic and it's driven by our call volume. And with that, I'll open it up if anybody has any questions.
Okay, thank you. Comments from the board? Diane and then Jean and Paul.
Just a quick question, Chief. Have we seen the average speed go down for those that have been ticketed since we lowered the speed limit across town?
Yeah, it actually has. It's gone down by, it's not much, but it's 4 miles an hour.
I mean, that's significant, actually, when you're talking about 40 and 30. Yep, it's 10%. Yeah.
Jean, are you done, Diane? Okay, thank you. Jean?
So Chief, I'm looking at what I think may be the study that Mr. Sylvia alluded to, and there it looks like the study identified that the highest amount of car crashes apart from 3A was King Street and then Atlantic, Beechwood, Jerusalem, North Main, Sawyer, and South Main. Is that consistent? That sort of line up without getting into specific numbers. Is that sort of consistent with where the police are still seeing crashes and traffic safety incidents?
So the King Street crashes, that's the section where most crashes are between Mobile Mart and Lower King Street. So Mobile Mart is 190 King Street and Lower King is like 80, I think 88. We have a ton of crashes in front of Dunkin' Donuts in the Avalon complex, as well as at Lower King. So the numbers are really skewed for King Street. It's not what we call, there are not a ton of crashes in King Street residential. It is heavily patrolled. Every day there's an officer down there, but it's it's sporadic. It's driven by the calls. I was looking at the day shift log. 3 days last week, the day shift log was 14 pages of calls for service and stops. So that's basically 2 to 3 officers handling that kind of volume.
Okay. Paul?
Well, first off, Chief, thank you. I think you guys are doing a fantastic job. I'll tell you the truth, because I go up King when I take my daughter up to swim practice. I see you guys everywhere. So you need to find a way. But, I like what you said about the engineering, putting things, any suggestions that you have, you could think of, and we'll, maybe jump onto that study that Jean was able to pull up, and I'm going to look at as soon as I can. Would be a great help. I know you have a limited force, so that anything that we can do on our end to mitigate that flow would be something I'd be very interested in trying to help with.
Yeah, so those the radar speed signs really help. We've installed them. O'Brien has installed them on Forest Ave, and they do impact. The studies have shown that they actually make an impact. If you think of yourself, when I'm driving along, somewhere and I see it, it starts flashing, you're going too fast. I slow right down.
Those are great.
We have another one that just came in. We got it on a grant. It's not waiting to be installed. We're talking about putting it on Beechwood Street. Maybe you know, that could be up for discussion. We've just applied for a fourth one, you know, through a state grant. They're about $6,000 a piece, unfortunately. And then to install them is another several $1,000s. So it's not cheap, but those do work. And also islands work. If you know, erect an island in the middle of the road and cant it in a certain way, you know, you can slow people down. In Westwood has done that. Westwood has whole areas of town with its traffic calming going on. And I've shared with previous boards the work that Westwood has done, and it's really made an impact. So it really is all about, you get the most bang for your buck through engineering.
Thank you, Chief.
Any other comments from the board?
And just, I'm sorry, as a side note, there is one of the radar signs on Sawyer Street is out, and that's being rectified. There's a repair order, and I don't know if it needs new batteries or what. They're all solar, so we're working on that.
Chief, I think one of the things that recent events have caused concern is school safety. And without portraying any techniques, what is your thought as to the safety of our kids in the schools, or the things that we as a town could do that would assist you?
Without getting too specific, with that, I've been working very closely with the former chair of the school committee and the superintendent of the schools, as well as the principals. We had a meeting we had everybody in the virtual room. And one of the things we're doing now is because the officers spend a ton of time writing reports, and they're off the road, you know, when they're writing reports, they have to come back to headquarters and you know, complete the reports, which can take up to an hour, or even a crash report. With the help of the IT department and the blessing of Chris Senior and the superintendent, we've put workstations in each school so the officers can write the reports in the school. So there's, you know, there's a random presence of uniformed police officers on each campus. Every school has a little office for the officer where we can complete reports. So it's a small thing, but I think it's an important thing. And you know, we have a large meeting coming up next month with all the stakeholders from the school to look at, you know, physical security. But you know, I do assure you, we have, you know, really good plans in place. And beyond that, we're working with the other Shrek chiefs, which are, you know, the Hingham, Hull, Norwell, and actually Situate asked to join in as well. And we're going to be doing some drills as far as a regional response. We call it a tackle alert. So there's more to come on that, you know, before school starts, but we'll be drilling with our surrounding departments in the event that any one of these departments gets a call for any type of active shooter or trouble at one of the schools.
Well, thank you. That is not a little thing. That's a very smart thing. You know, Paul, you know, on this, we don't want to spend too much time on this. We've got a couple of very interesting things coming up, but go ahead, Paul.
This won't take long. Chief, in regard to the safety of the children, you know, is it feasible at certain times of day, just something to look at, you know, limited one ways from 7 to 9 or drop offs? You know, you see a lot of, you know, things happening that at both schools. Kids are getting dropped off, people cutting around. Is it feasible for more signage one way? I'm just asking you to maybe look at some possibilities that could mitigate that from someone cutting over because they have to get down the hill. Then God forbid some little kid gets hit just because someone had to get their coffee. So signage may be limited one ways for a period of time, you know, certain hours of the day. Like you can't use Sawyer Street going, you know, south for, that's all I'm getting at with that.
No, I think that's a good idea. And you know, I was up there this morning. Rec camp is, I think, in the second or third day of, you know, it's a new year for rec camp. And it was just absolute chaos. I actually have video of it I can share with you guys offline, but there's quite literally a landscaping truck driving up the sidewalk of Sawyer Street, dragging a trailer. There's cars on the wrong side of the road. They were meeting other cars on the wrong side of the road in the middle of the road. People go, I mean, it was chaos. We had to take the 2 sector offices and assign them down there along with the school resource officer just to try to clear traffic. So we had a meeting this morning with Ted Carroll and his assistant, and they took steps to get permission to use the music circus as a satellite, like a holding pen, I guess, for parents. And then they'll let them go 5 at a time to whichever campus they're going to. But what it is, it's a volume issue. They're a victim of their success, and the schools are as well. There's too many people in too constrained of a time. And, you add to that people trying to get up to 3A, to go to work or, do shopping or whatever it is. And it's just, it's a volume problem. And, the goal is to try to get people off of Sawyer Street. And it's going to come down to engineering.
Well, I think this clearly indicates that we need to have a further do this in another meeting with the select board, the police, and the or representatives from the select board, the police, and representatives from the schools. Well, anything else of Diane, did you just?
Yeah, sorry. I just wanted a thumbs up on what Paul's suggestion, and especially like middle high school, when you have new drivers, it's just chaos when you have people rolling around and going into the other lane. And so it's a really creative way to think about maybe mitigating some of the issues.
Okay, very good. Chief, thank you very much. You do an excellent job. You're well regarded, and I like some of your very innovative, smart, easy things to do that make a difference. So thank you.
Thanks, I appreciate that. And just one final note, and we're going to put the crossing guard. She's been pressed into service. Her summer has ended already. We're going to put her up on Sawyer Street and just help with the kids crossing. So she'll be there tomorrow morning, and she was happy
Very
to help.
good.
So we're appreciative.
Well done, and thank you. Okay, unless there's any other questions, anybody from the community at large? Okay. Next, we're going to the Elm Street Project Working Group. It might be helpful if we have a diagram of that and some of the proposals at least available. Who wants to, Brian, is that something you want to go over? And do we have the diagrams of the Elm Street projected solutions for that island and whatever?
I think, Jack, maybe it makes sense just to start at least with the option that the Elm Street Working Group recommended.
Sure.
So, Diane's on the Elm Street Working Group. She can talk about, if it makes sense, what the Elm Street Working Group recommended. We can put up the option 1, the diagram that they recommended, and go from there.
Yeah.
I would honestly not want to be the person to make the presentation, only because I didn't prepare for it. But it was option 1. And one thing I do want to say, and I think it goes to some of the conversation we've had throughout the evening, which is there are a number of residents that have come to the Elm Street Working Group meetings fairly regularly that are frustrated with the Zoom platform as a way to have really hefty public conversations. So I do think with a lot of studies and I for one look forward to moving into more of a hybrid model, because I think people like to see the big presentation boards, whether you're at planning board or zoning or in this case Elm Street. So I just wanted to note that, because it is a concern of a number of people. And one of the things Elm Street Corridor did, as we voted unanimously to make a recommendation, but at the same time we also said we would take some time, probably next week or the week after, to try to have a meeting in person where people could actually sit and talk and look and kind of tactilely figure out what the drawings are actually saying. So.
Okay. So Brian, where are we? Can we? Well, first of all, the Elm Street Working Group is a creation of the master plan implementation. Am I
It was,
correct?
it was a committee charged by the select board. as-
Right, okay.
When we
True that.
adopted the
Okay.
priority goals from the master plan, yes.
Okay, I just wanted to, clarify that. It's not a statutory board. It was created by the select board. And does somebody have a copy of the working group charge?
I have a copy of that charge. Hold on a second.
All right.
I feel especially unprepared for this because I assumed that there was going to be a presentation from one of the leaders on the Elm Street corridor group.
Well, right now, so Jack, if you want, I can try to maneuver this through. So
Sure.
right now, as the agenda says, this is one street of many that we're considering, right? As we look at the whole big picture. And we knew that Elm Street was meeting last week. They made their recommendation. What struck me listening to the video after, because I wasn't able to be on the video, and I agree, I think there's residents actually that really want to continue to participate. And I think that having it at 3:30 in the afternoon is hard for some, including those who live on that street, to have it during the working day. So I think that any meeting that the select board has going forward should be at night to allow for residents not to have to, take time off of work to do this. I think it should be inclusive. And we should provide notice, written notice, which is what was happening previously and is now not happening. So I think any meetings the select board does, I think should require written notice to those residents as it previously did. But I think what would be productive going forward is to get a brief summary of the recommendation that the Elm Street Working Group adopted, which is option 1. It's available on our website. If you want, I can put that up on my screen, Jack, if
Sure,
that
go
makes
ahead.
sense to you.
I really want to say I'm very uncomfortable going forward. Like, I don't know why there isn't somebody from the committee. I was not going to be able to make this meeting and I literally came tonight. I wish I could be prepared for this. I would have reviewed the program, but I guess that's a question for Chris, whether there's a staff member, because that's how the working groups were set up, whether it's zoning, et cetera, was that it was really a staff kind of led program with input from the public. And I don't disagree that I think some of these meetings, I think that's what happened with zoning, with some of the zoning bylaws, is that, we really should have more evening meetings.
Well, can I just address that briefly? Number one, just, I saw part of it, but it appeared that there were maybe 3 people at that meeting last week. And by the way, this agenda was posted, a week ago. So it isn't like it was just out there not being, notified for anybody in that group. It was clear that this was due there. But, and anyway, Diane, how many people were there when they had the working group?
Jack, you want to know? I don't know how many people were there, but I will tell
Okay.
you that we've had up to 35 to 40 people participating on a regular basis at these meetings. But again, I wasn't expecting to be here representing the Elm Street project. And I wish
No, I'm
there
not
was somebody that could allay, because this is an important priority of the town, as the select board has voted that priority a number of times. So I really wish it was given its fair due, which is somebody that's a little more well-versed on it than I am. Especially because I wasn't going to be here until this morning.
Well, that's fine. I just a factual question. How many people were there?
I don't know. I don't take the minutes. I apologize.
I mean, was it 3? Was it 30?
Well, the committee was there. I don't know. I have no idea.
All right.
Honestly,
Well,
don't.
okay. Anyway,
Why don't I share the screen? Oh, sorry.
share the screen and let's see. what the recommendation was.
Okay, I believe this is it. And Diane, this is not meant to be a trick question. You're a select board liaison for the group. So I thought that this would be a straightforward question about, this is, I believe.
I understand that, but excuse me, usually there's outreach to somebody to ask if they can do a presentation. So
this is not a presentation in my
Okay.
mind. We
Okay.
are trying, so in my mind, what I heard is that there needs to be continued work, including on the cost estimates for Elm Street. The group no longer exists because the charge has expired. And so the select board should be making a decision about whether to continue and what exactly to do. And it would be my opinion that we should have members like Mike Sardinia, who I see is raising his hand, continue to
Thank
work
you,
with
Mike.
Brian Joyce on cost estimates, because I also saw in that working group meeting that there was a lot of concern about the cost that was being provided with respect to that option. And I think that the select board, unless we want work to sort of just grind to a halt, we need to continue to talk about it and continue to have further work being done by the town at this point, if we want to advance this to a point where we can have a real presentation to the board that also involves resident input and more realistic cost numbers. And so that's the point I think we're trying to get to, is figuring out those next steps to have an actual substantive, meaningful presentation. That's at least in my
That's
mind
great.
what needs to
Yeah.
happen next.
Yeah, just a point of clarification on the sunsetting. I believe it's extended. I believe the committee's sunsets in August. So we do have to take action before August as to whether we want to, keep this group going out. And hopefully we can get to an actual recommendation and decision on this prior to that. But I don't disagree that, a more fulsome presentation, and Mike Sardina might have some, because he's been working specifically, he's a landscape architect and has been working with our engineering staff all along on this.
So right now, I'm on what I understand is the option that was recommended, just so the public can see. Am I incorrect about that, Brian? You're looking at it. I clicked
Yes,
on.
that's correct. Yeah,
option
so
one.
the Corridor Elm Street group voted to move forward with or to recommend option one, which is landscaping on the south side and removing the parking on the north side. So there's parking on the south side of the street and an additional kind of grassed area that you can see there in green, and then a sidewalk that is adjacent to the parking area. And so the entirety of Elm Street, and if you scroll to the bottom, including the reconfiguration of the island there near Cove Road for traffic.
Brian, can you remind me of the cost for this the cost estimate as it stands today? I think it was 1.3, I want to say.
Yeah, so including a 30% contingency, which is healthy, but it's typical for a conceptual design. It's 1.39 million.
So let me add a little color to some of this conversation. The neighbors in particular have been involved in the discussion of what we see on the screen that's in front of us with the sidewalk and the extra green space and the parking on one side. The idea on this street, basically, and one of the reasons it rose to the top of the master plan recommendations is it is a street that is connecting the village and the harbor. There was going to be significant work in the harbor, and this has always been kind of a priority road because almost everybody drives on Elm Street at some point if they're in the village area. So, and to Chief Quigley's point earlier, it needs traffic calming because it is a very, very wide road. So it becomes sort of a very big thoroughfare. some of the concern, and I brought it up at the meeting that the select board had and some residents have, is changing what we're looking at here, which is kind of right in front of the new building. And if you recall, Tom Callahan spoke at our last select board meeting when we kind of touched upon this, and that there was, and I don't think it's a formal condition, but the expectation was that they recommended that there be sort of a build out of green space directly in front of the building, because the building is going to be very different than what we see, and certainly what we see now. So the scale in and of itself, visually speaking, is going to be, as well as the traffic flow in this area, because it's one of those where people just keep going one way or the other, left or right, at full speed, like without having to make an actual turn. So this was done for calming reasons and for kind of the visual impact of the new building at the recommendation of the planning board. So it was a priority from the master plan based on, speed, and it being one of those roads that almost everybody's on. The sidewalks were in bad shape. There was all kinds of parking challenges, and it was wider than it should be for safe traffic flow. So that's kind of where this project came about in terms of prioritizations. The other thing I think it's worth mentioning is it's currently the State Forward Act has earmarked some amount of money. I believe it's like $550-ish thousand to go towards this particular project.
Is that guaranteed, Diane?
If the bill gets signed by the governor, my understanding is that it would, that is a line item that we would be receiving, yes.
I can clarify that. We've looked into that. The Forward Act is before the legislature. It will require the government signature. There's a very specific allocation in there for this particular intersection for somewhere around 500. I think Chris said it was roughly 500,000. It is dependent upon that Forward Act getting through the legislature and being signed by the governor. The politics in that in Beacon Hill is that the legislature may not want to move it forward until there's a new, presumably from a different party, governor in there. So we really don't know. If this is approved, and if it goes through, we will get 500,000 for this project only. It's important for people to understand that if we got that 500,000, it gets spent on this. So it isn't something that we would get and then we could spend on streets elsewhere in town. It is specifically for this particular project. So for people who are saying, well, we could take the money and use it elsewhere, no. If it goes through, which is probably pretty likely that it will, but the money is allocated just for this particular project. So that's the factual matter on it. And Diane, I did look up on our list of Elm Street Corridor Working Group, and the terms all ended on 6/30.
Okay, that was not my understanding.
I know, I'm just looking at, we pulled for not just this, but for all of the boards and commissions, we pulled the whole, we asked, I think Tracy to provide us with a whole list of all the people. So we weren't just doing this, and I just went through my list and it's 6:30.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Hey, Jack, could I ask a technical question for Brian? I know that Margin and Atlantic to Whitehead has been considered maybe a part of the Elm Street project. Is the 1.39 million, does that include that road work? And does the Forward Act grant include that road work?
No, so the 1.39 million. So Kittleson and Associates did a cost estimate based on our current MAPC paving contract, just for the Elm Street corridor and the intersection we're looking at on the screen. Doesn't include Margin Street or Atlantic Avenue. And it also does not include design work that would be required to put in sidewalks. And so an engineering effort of doing design level bid plans would be additional to that.
For the plans we're looking at right here.
Yeah, this is a concept design. Generally, you have a concept design that you agree upon, and then you go through design development where you get a 25% design, 75%, and then 100% design. And in the final design drawings, you take those to the contractor, and you'll have elevations of the sidewalk so that they know the curb cuts and what driveway elevations are relative. This is just kind of a plan view concept.
So the 1.39 plus the cost of the design plans.
Correct. And I'll just say, any new sidewalk work that's changing any configuration in town will, like King Street, will require design work, survey, and design work to get bid ready documents.
So guesstimate as to what the additional cost would be for this, assuming this project were approved as it sits.
Probably about $80,000 to $100,000 for the getting design level drawings.
Okay. No, go ahead. I'm just. Okay, so what we have is a situation. There were four
Jack.
people. Yeah.
And Jack Paul's raising his hand.
Oh, okay. Go ahead, Paul.
So Brian, over the 1 point something million, then you add just the $80,000, or do we tack more onto that? To finalize the plans, the sidewalks.
To be conservative, I would put 100,000 on top of that, but there's a 30% contingency in this budget, which is equal to $322,000. So it's, as you go through design development, you take out, the unknowns, and that contingency comes down in percentage.
Okay, and I have one more question. So say this all went through and then we started paving, doing our thing. But then we start construction on the CHP project. Now, what kind of effect would that have on any new roads, or would you recommend waiting until after the project is built to start finishing working this project?
I think the traffic down in that area, there's not a lot of there's heavy equipment on site, but there's not a lot of heavy traffic in and out of there as far as that would impact the road construction. So I wouldn't hold up, knowing that the road should have been paid 2 years ago. So we're kind of behind as far as the road deteriorating and ready to pave it. So I wouldn't hold up the construction on that.
So we pave it, and then I understand that you said the heavy equipment's there, but income starts coming. Steel, building supplies, heavy trucks, semi-tractor trailers. That's a lot of weight. I'm in the trucking business, so I kind of keep my handle on what they do, and I know what they do to roads. I'm just asking what your thoughts are on that. That's on a brand new road. I'm just not seeing that doing any good, and I don't know what the building schedule is. So
yeah, I don't
imagine a new road not being degraded somewhat.
Yeah, I don't know what the building schedule is, but if we made a decision today, this is what we're doing, and let's go ahead with it. We're not paving this until next summer, fall. Anyway, we need to get the appropriation. We need to get the design done, and the actual road construction wouldn't be until a year from now, or a year and a couple of months.
So,
no, please.
So does anybody have Diana, and I also want to get a feeling for how this is being paid for above the 500,000. Is CHP paying part of this? I just don't know. Are there mitigation payments or whatever? But anyway, Diane, you had your hand up.
Yeah, no, all good questions. And I think that that's part of where we're at with a lot of these projects, which is, we don't have funding. And the question is, have we, it's like everything we've talked about with, including town hall, where are we in the process here? And I think we have a recommendation. I, like with other committees, nothing sunsets till it gets every one of our working groups and a lot of our committee appointments expire on 6:30. I would just ask that we, let the Elm Street corridor come in. We have an actual working meeting where we're getting all the questions answered, and then we talk about, because it's still a proposed plan. Nothing's been approved until we get funding for it, and nothing's going to happen. And it's not going to take the place in the queue of any other project until we're a lot further down the road in terms of a commitment with Forward Act and any kind of appropriation that might be needed.
Yeah, we have two, Mike Sardinia and look like Mike Dick are waiting, but Paul?
So while this is still in the planning phase, couldn't we be attacking projects that that are priorities as well?
I think we are doing what we can. We're
Yeah.
going through.
We're continuing with our 1.5 to 2 miles a year. Whether this is one of them or not, it's just priority wise, and we'll know more next week. Where this condition is relative to other roads in town. But yeah, we're going to keep paving.
And the other question that I don't know the answer to, because when Tom Callahan brought it up at the last meeting, Paul, maybe you know the answer to, but he did say that there was, in the decision from the planning board, that there was an expectation that there would be some kind of visual mitigation that took place on Elm Street and at the corner of Elm Street, Margin and Cove.
Well, if I don't want to put words in Tom's mouth, but if the island, if I'm reading the plans correctly, and I'm not an expert, putting them up against where it covers the curb, I don't know if that's going to offer any mitigation. I'd really like to hear some opinions from, say, the fire chief, police chief, as to traffic flow. You're moving an island that's existing. Again, Jack mentioned we don't know who's paying for that. If that grant comes through, that's a different story. I understand that. But that to me is important, and also seeing what I'd like the expert opinions from the chief. Is it going to hamper fire apparatus or anything along those lines?
So if I could just say, if I could just answer that. So the fire chief, Chief Sylvia, was on the Elm Street corridor, and as a voting member, and Chief Dockeray also has attended the meetings as a voting member. So they have been integral, actually, and probably know more about what this is doing in terms of mitigation and equipment movement than any of us, with the exception of maybe Brian, who's an engineer.
I think that's fantastic. I just love to hear from them.
Yeah, that suggests we want to hear. Jean?
So just a fact check on the planning board decision as it relates to CHP. I believe when we were talking about mitigation, the developer agreed to pay $10,000 towards the redesign. And that in that decision, so that's $10,000 for the relocation of the road. And in that decision, the planning board said there was an intent to relocate the road, but obviously the planning board doesn't have the authority to relocate roads. That's the select board, or to tax our citizens for the benefit of a project. And so that's what that decision says. I think one question I had on the money is it only 10,000 in mitigation for the entire CHP project? That's my first question that I have for town staff, if they could chase that down. My second question is, I believe Elm Street was, and I think I brought this up at the last meeting and the answer was not clear. I believe Elm Street had water work done through it, or sewer work, one of the two. And are there funds sitting in one of those enterprise funds to pay for that paving? Because I have what I think may be a possible solution, a compromise perhaps. But part of it depends on the answers to those questions. And
So-
I see that, sorry, Carl.
Yeah, Brian, and I do think Mike Sardinia, I know, is very knowledgeable, and Mike Dick are, I think they'll have useful things to add to that. So, Brian.
No, I was just saying, I could answer that second question. So there's no water funding out there for road paving other than the trench paving that's already occurred. I haven't been involved in the development or any of that, so I can't answer that first question.
Okay. Paul, did you have something you wanted to say? And then I think, I'd like to get Mike Sardinia and I'd like to get Mike Dick on here. So.
Okay, I'm promoting Mr. Sardinia. He should be able to talk.
Hey, Mike, we're
Hi,
waiting.
how you doing? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to rescue Diane.
Yeah. Mike, you have to identify your name and address.
Mike Sardina, 100 Pond Street, Unit 56. I'm the citizen at large on the Elm Street corridor working group. And I just wanted to let you know, since Diane was hoping that there'd be somebody else on the working group on this call, that I'm available for questions. Relative to the plans that were up, those plans were produced this past January for the sole purpose of having cost estimates done for either the entirety of what was those 3 sheets of drawings, or
Excuse me, Mike, as a public meeting, especially since you're clearly giving pretty valuable information, can you turn on your video? It's a requirement of the open meeting law and Zoom meetings.
I don't see any place to.
There should be up on the top, it'll say video, a little picture of a camera. Do you have a camera?
I don't have a camera.
So Jack, just for
No,
clarification.
we're not going to worry about it.
Yeah, the public body that's in session, which is the select board, has to be on camera. Obviously, it's preferable if everybody's on camera, but it's the requirement by law is of us.
I know. I'm just saying because he's a member of a select board commission on that would be a good idea. He doesn't have it. I'm not going to worry about it. Go ahead, Mike. There he is. Now unmute yourself.
Yeah, so the 3 sheets that were shown earlier were part of an exercise to try to get a cost estimate, a more realistic cost estimate prepared at the direction of, I believe, either the planning director or Chris Senior or somebody asking for this to be evaluated based on what the estimates were that Weston and Sampson, the consultants that had been hired to do the concept plan, which had estimates that were quite severe relative to the acceptability of all of us. So when this particular diagram that Jason Federico put together was costed, it came in at roughly $1.35 million for the entirety of the thing. There was a second diagram done, which was so-called value engineered plan. The value engineered plan basically had the parking on both sides of the street to remain. The only thing that changed relative to what's existing is the intersection down in the Cove Street area that you saw in the 3 plans that were on the screen a few minutes ago. That remained the same for both alternatives, alternate 1 and alternate 2. The interesting thing is to basically rebuild Elm Street the way it exists currently, and to rebuild it with one lane of parking removed, which is alternate 1. There was $100,000 difference. So it's like short money to have a much better driver and pedestrian experience relative to what was voted on last week by the working group to recommend as the diagram and concept that goes forward. It's fair to say that Chief Sylvia was a heavy participant throughout almost every single meeting relative to fire equipment and police responses. He did say that approximately 30% of their trips actually went down Elm Street to Summer Street. That prompted a considerable amount of evaluation relative to intersection design and or configurations of either Elm Street or Cove Street or Summer Street. And the plan that you saw a few minutes ago was basically where the consensus of the working group ended up relative to life safety concerns. Another significant piece relative to the intent of this concept was born out of the survey, the online survey that was produced by the consultants, which asked the community to prioritize their wishes for improvements for the Elm Street corridor. And one of the most significant was safety relative to children. There's a significant amount of bike traffic on Elm Street that goes to either the sailing club or to the yacht club in the summertime. And there's a lot of conflict with narrow sidewalks and bikes and what have you. So part of the input from the neighbors on Elm Street was, and from others, Chief Sylvia was basically driving the desire for a wider sidewalk, particularly on the south side, and crosswalks and other connecting features that would enhance the safety of kids on bikes and pedestrians. So it's fair to say that the entire driving and pedestrian experience that we're trying to achieve with this particular diagram is significantly better than what we have currently.
Mike, Jean had a question for you.
Just one question on the sidewalks and the kid safety issue. Is there a safety reason why the new grass is on the inside and not the outside of the sidewalk next to the street? Most sidewalks have the grass strip on the outside. And, you know, as I watch kids sort of like maneuver around, it is a protection for the kids, I think, to have extra space so they don't fall into the street as they ride their bikes down. And I think just aesthetically it looks better. I appreciate there are resident concerns about whether the town will maintain the grass strip appropriately, but from a safety perspective, was there some, or from a cost perspective, was there some reason why we see the grass essentially enlarging the residents' yards as compared to being on the outside of the sidewalk?
Yes, the reason for the grass to be shown where it is, which is on the outside of the sidewalk, is that basically the sidewalk is against the parking. And the parking is actually a barrier relative to kid safety, relative to travelers, road traffic. So basically you have a barrier between pedestrians and bicyclists and cars moving in the travel lanes because you have parking spaces there. So you have an 8-foot buffer and or basically a vehicle sitting there, which is a physical buffer. And to be honest with you, that green strip that's showing outside the sidewalk, some of that already exists as front yards, and only a couple feet of that is new. Because when you take all the dimensions of the proposed cross-section of the roads and the sidewalks and the parking, you only gain a couple feet of additional grass relative to that entire system. So what Jason has is he's got green between the back of the sidewalk and the actual property lines, some of which already exists.
Okay,
Yep, go ahead, Mike.
okay, thank you.
The question I think that Paul raised earlier about Margin Street and Summer, those areas are actually indicated in the Weston and Sampson diagram, their conceptual diagram, as being part of the Elm Street corridor improvements, and theoretically were part of their cost estimate, which was, as I said, exorbitant. But in Jason's diagram, he didn't extend it as far as those areas. Now, one of the things that I'm gonna kind of divert here a little bit. One of the things that this whole system of Elm Street is trying to do is connect, obviously, the village more strongly to the harbor. And this area of the Summer Street intersection with Border Street is actually sort of the nexus of two systems coming together. One is the Elm Street system coming together with the Border Street system, which is part of the Cohasset Harbor Infrastructure Planning Working Group's area, which includes seawalls and dredging and the breakwater, Captain's Walk, and a number of other things. The Captain's Walk is an opportunity to basically create a wider walk system along the harbor edge that would tie into the Elm Street wider walk system. And the intersection at Summer Street is sort of the critical place where all the stuff comes together. One of the items that is, in my mind, pretty important for that intersection is that that's an area where resiliency, storm resiliency can be implemented, because if the road is raised slightly, almost at the point of the Memorial Park and the open space that's just to the south of it, if you raise the road in there about 2 feet and you marry that with grade change all the way across the harbor side of the Memorial Park and the public parking that's behind the Memorial Park, with the higher grades associated with the condo project all the way over to Margin Street, you've created a dike. And that basically would prevent flooding of the entire Elm Street system.
Okay.
So that intersection at Summer Street is theoretically, at least the way it was charged to the consultants, as part of this Elm Street project, but in reality, it's really an area that has much more significance relative to the harbor infrastructure planning as it relates to seawater resiliency, Captain's Walk, and other items associated with that parking, et cetera.
Okay. Mike, you've been very, 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 very helpful. We have Mike Dick, who's also waiting. Do you have anything you'd like to, add further, or can we bring Mike Dick on?
I've got a question.
Okay. Paul?
Mike, something you just said just kind of threw me a little bit for a curve. You said raising the roads over by the Memorial Park, then that combined with the CHP project forms a dike. That just, if you can clarify that a little bit. So we're talking about using technically a building as a breakwater? I know I'm off. Please clarify, because that kind of threw me for a curve that we're using a building as a breakwater that has occupancy in it. To protect Elm Street.
Let me just be clear about this. There are things like resiliency, Captain's Walk, parking, a whole number of items that have interfaces relative to public interest and potentially public planning in this stage that have interfaces with private development projects. And the potential of coordinating the public interest versus the private interest and the options that might come out of dialogue in those particular cases hasn't really yet happened. The private projects are ahead of the planning of the public projects relative to the what ifs, the opportunities, the constraints, et cetera, the kit of parts, if you will. And so what I just said about that dike system, which is not a really good term for it, it's basically more of a barrier. It's a soft barrier, it's a landscape barrier, if you will, is purely what I see as an opportunity. Now, the condominium project has, as far as I can tell on their plans, they have grade change on the backside of their condominium project, which separates the public access that they are providing along the water's edge from the more private spaces associated with the condo's residents. Those private spaces are elevated relative to the public side. So in one respect, just by nature of design, they are providing sort of a higher edge. That higher edge goes almost all the way over through either architectural features or exterior architectural features, all the way over to the Margin Street interface. What's lacking is where the public land occurs, which is the public parking and Memorial Park and Border Street, which is basically town property. And so there's a simple fix there as I see it. Without getting too detailed here, the road elevation on Margin Street is elevation 13 at the high point, plus or minus. Elevation 13 relative to topographic surveys is the equivalent of a water level at 18. So the water level would have to be at 18 in order to breach over that hump and start flooding Elm Street. So if you take an elevation of 13 or 12 or whatever, and you extend it all the way across over to Border Street, you now have a barrier that allows water to get up to elevation 17 plus or minus before it actually will flood. Now the section on Border Street is at elevation 10. So if you raise it 2 feet, you've created the barrier. You have to elevate the walk that's along the water's edge at Memorial Park, then you'd have to raise the walk that's along the water's edge adjacent to the public parking behind Memorial Park as well.
Okay,
but
thank you.
that could be coordinated to interface with the grounds on the public or on the public spaces that are associated with the condo project, the private property.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Jean, you had your hand raised. Jean?
Yeah, sorry, I muted myself. I think all of what Mike is saying is extremely interesting and worthy of consideration. And I know we have an ongoing resiliency study of these exact areas right now. And I think that's a really important consideration in terms of timing and what we decide to do in these critical areas. Right now, the plan that I'm looking at does not contemplate resiliency measures in that way. And again, I know I said this last week and I'm going to say it, or whenever our last meeting was, and I'm going to say it again. I think that it is worth the select board's time to really carefully consider the resiliency implications when we're addressing our roads around the harbor. In part because, and this goes to the money question, we may likely get money for a bunch of resiliency grants that are out there. We already applied for money through the prior Elm Street proposal under the auspices of resiliency, and we didn't get it. And fair enough to the state of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, because we don't have resiliency built into this project. And so I think that from my perspective, it's really important that we have that information and we consider it and we really bake it in a thoughtful way, including on the funding side, because 1.5 million, which is 3 years of paving all of our entire road paving schedule for Cohasset, is a lot of money for 0.4 miles. And I think that that's going to be a hard sell to Cohasset. And I think we're going to need to find grants that really do help offset these very expensive projects. We haven't even touched margin in Atlantic, which is on our agenda. And that's a very expensive project as well, because I understand from what Brian will tell us, that's a full road reclamation and they have flooding issues as well. So my strong preference is with all of these road issues that we have a plan that takes into account resiliency and we try to maximize state grants for it. And really take the time to do that correctly. And so this is why I continue to press for, I would like to see Elm Street, the main stretch that I don't think we could reasonably, although I could be wrong, someone could tell me, press for resiliency. If we did something different and waited for them and press for resiliency, we get money. I think that stretch of land is there. I would like us to try to think through what we can do on that Elm Street stretch of land right now, particularly if we get that Forward Act money. I think that makes a whole bunch of sense to see if we can make some modest improvements on that stretch of land and then address the harbor in a holistic way and really shoot for the stars with some real resiliency measures. That would be my strong preference.
And so if I could jump in, I think that, this project is clearly, we're not here, or the presentation is not here to ask for money. It's similar to, the sports fields. It's that we have some concepts and we want to move forward. This is not a request for the funding right now. So I think there's still a lot of conversations to have in terms of, this is the direction the committee wanted to go. I also want to say we hired a consultant over a year ago that had a number of public meetings that were very well attended. So this was not just 4 people in a room, whether there were 3 people last week or 12 people, or this has been an ongoing prioritization that this board voted on, or a select board voted on. And, I think the conversation just needs to be continued. So I would respectfully ask that we kind of just keep this going. And to your point, Jean, maybe we bring in some of the resiliency conversations to see, because again, this is a conceptual design. It's not a finished product. And in order to get any kind of a finished design, we need to, have a little more information and a funding source. So I think I would like to just see this conversation continued and maybe have another concentric circle out of input from the community to start linking some of these other initiatives, especially in the harbor.
Paul, are you raising your hand or just?
Sorry?
Were you? I didn't know if you were raising your hand.
No.
If I might suggest, given the late hour, I think we should think about it and we should continue this conversation on Tuesday. We should continue the conversation as we mull over what might be the appropriate next steps, including with respect to our town staff time on this.
Yeah, I think as my feeling is that I'm a little disappointed that with a week's notice, the developer couldn't come to this meeting with the Elm Street on there, but he doesn't have to, or they don't have to, that company. But, it's a week and we discussed it beforehand. I would hope that, seeing as how we're talking about something that's right in the middle of their project, that they would be prepared to attend meetings in the future. So I think we should move on. We have other things to do. It is getting late. I think we need to understand there's 2 things that have to be done. Number 1, we have to recharge this committee. And then we have to appoint the new members to the committee after it's recharged, and that's just a housekeeping deal, and we can probably put it on for, our next meeting. So anybody have any further comments?
Now, when you
Okay.
said developer, are you talking Weston Sampson or, I mean, because the ultimate design that's being proposed is from, it's something that was done internally from our engineering staff.
I would expect the CHP to be here.
I
mean,
don't think this
this
has
is the
anything to do with them.
It's right in the middle of their project.
I understand that,
they
but it's a
don't wanna
public
come-
project.
If they don't want to come, they don't have to. But I would say that we're discussing something that impacts them, their project greatly, and we're also seeing that resiliency, as it stands now, if they built it, what would happen is when the water came up, it would go around their project and down Elm Street. So, but if they choose not to, but I would think that they would want to be part of the conversation. That being said, I think we've agreed we're gonna, put this off and move on to the next thing. I think we've covered South Main Street and sidewalks. Does anybody think that and by the way, Mike, thank you for showing up.
Thank you, Mike.
I appreciate it. Mike has done tremendous work. He and I spent, an hour and a half on the phone the other day. I have more knowledge than I have the capacity to absorb, but thank you, Mike. Anyway,
Thanks for bailing me out.
Thanks, Diane. Bye.
Diane, you did just fine. So you didn't need any bailing out whatsoever. Anyway, South Main Street and sidewalks, did we cover that sufficiently?
I think so.
Okay, we have Doan Church, Ash and Short Streets and Smith Place. Brian, do you see of any of these other things that you'd like to bring us up to date on? Very briefly.
So very briefly, Doan Church, Ash, Short Street and Smith Place. We're looking at the water mains there. Ash and Short Street have 1910 water mains that need to be replaced. Church Street is good, 1999. Smith Place is good, and Doan Street has an old a 1960s vintage AC pipe that would need to be further looked at. Whether
AC is
asbestos concrete.
Okay.
Yeah, but so that's where we stand. So Smith and Church are good to go. The other ones need some water main work, which is in their 10-year capital plan. We may need to move it up. When I say the capital plan, the Water Commission capital plan.
Okay.
Beechwood Street, the east side from South Main to 3A. There is gas main work, I believe, in that area. King Street sidewalk we talked about before. The sidewalk across from the common overlay on the sidewalk. So I just will say that, in any kind of work on a sidewalk, even overlays will require ADA ramps where they transition to roadways. So that's a consideration. Forest Ave and Jerusalem Road, shared road, bike markings and safety measures. So that's an easy, cheap fix on a lot of things. There are some sharrows if you go across Cunningham Bridge. It's basically a picture of a bicycle with a couple of arrows. It's called
Yes.
Sharrow. Those are pretty cheap, and we could install them, where appropriate and where folks and the board would want them. And signage is also relatively cheap, compared to hardscape road construction. And then the last item, other roads and sidewalks up for consideration. I would reference the master plan, which has a pretty significant list of priorities. And again, next Friday, we're getting our road assessment report. So that will be distributed to you all for digestion and consideration and more discussion.
Okay. Diane?
Yeah, just a quick question, Brian, on when you were talking about Doan, Church, Ash, Short, and Smith. A few of them you said good to go. What does that mean?
So when I say good to go, we're looking at the utilities that need to be replaced subsurface before you do the road construction, and Ash Street, Short Street, and potentially Doan may need some water main work, which obviously requires capital appropriation for and money from the water department, and then the replacement of those water mains. And then the trench would need to settle for a year prior to paving it. The other ones, Smith Place and Church, the water mains are new and won't need to be replaced. So all the utilities look good there.
And are those two particular streets on the kind of short-term paving
Yes.
schedule? Got it. Thank you.
Brian, it just occurred to me in conjunction with what we're doing here and the work that you're doing with the streets and updoing, our communications policy and our website. Do you think, and just to think about conceptually, if you had some kind of color-coded thing where people would look at a street and say, oh, that's where it is, yes, it's a mess now, but waiting for water mains, waiting for that. I mean, it's just, we don't want to spend time, it's 10:15, but maybe that's something you want to think about. No hurry, you've got a lot of other stuff to do, but.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, we have a master, we have a spreadsheet, a lot of different spreadsheets, but we have spreadsheets that have, road dimensions, road configurations, lengths, and water main and age and things like that. So anything we put out there, I'd want to put it in a digestible format, easy to read.
Yes. We would have our communications guy work with you on that. And I think it's a concept that may be useful. I think the citizens would like it. It would take that you wouldn't have to field as many phone calls. And we have communications specialists who can help you take your technical stuff into a digestible form. So anyway, I think we're all set on here. There are no topics reasonably anticipated. I would say that I think to the board members, thank you all for being here. It's a little bit later than we'd hoped, but I think that this has been an extraordinarily productive meeting. And I hope that the people who are still watching at home have noticed that this is an exercise in which people at home can see how the select board looks at these things. It also gives all of us the opportunity to go back and forth, which we can't do because of the open meeting laws. People should understand we can't get on together and discuss this unless it's an open meeting. So that's what this forum is meant to be. And we're going to continue this, next week. And that being said, Chair would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor, roll call vote. Diane Kennedy.
Diane Kennedy, aye.
Special thanks to Diane. She went through that special thanks for Diane. She was stuck in the worst traffic jam ever, but she's here. Thank you, Diane. Jean.
Now I get to drive to Maine, Northern Maine. I have to be there at 9 a.m.
Safe travel.
Thanks.
Yeah. Paul Grady.
Aye.
Jack Creighton, aye. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you all for coming.
Have a safe trip, Diane.
Most thank the citizens who are still up. Thank you.